Chapter 1176. Grey Castle, City of Neverwinter. In the castle conference hall. With the expansion of the administrative office, the hall, which used to be big enough, was now a little small. Many department heads had to move a small stool and sit behind their ministers and deputy ministers. More clerks and assistants had to lean against the wall. The room was tightly packed with nearly 200 people. It seemed that there was a need to build a special conference hall in the castle area to meet the needs of all kinds of meetings in the future. Roland thought, these are only the senior officials of Neverwinter. When the managers of other cities come to the new king's city to report, I'm afraid that the first floor of the castle will not be able to accommodate them. After recording this idea in his notebook, he gently clapped his hands, and the conference hall immediately quieted down. I think everyone knows that the torch operation, which has lasted for nearly 10 months, has been a complete success. Now, our footprints have extended to the fertile plains, which is hundreds of kilometers away from Neverwinter. The threat from the demons has been completely wiped out. From now on, the west of Neverwinter is no longer a barren land full of danger and difficult to traverse. It's a fertile land that can provide us with abundant resources. After a pause, Roland raised his voice and said, "That's right. This plain, which is even wider than the four kingdoms combined, will be the main development direction of Grey Castle in the next 100 years. The hall was instantly filled with thunderous applause. Expanding the territory was the most important achievement for the king, and it was also the easiest way for the officials to gain benefits. Even the ordinary subjects could get a share of the benefits. Now there was suddenly a new territory that could accommodate several Grey Castle. The significance of this was self-evident, and no amount of praise could be overstated. I'm afraid that the four kingdoms will completely become history in a few years, Barav said with a smile, stroking his beard. Whether in terms of size or strength, they're far inferior to Grey Castle. You're right. If the history books and biographies are written like before, I'm afraid that the future generations will laugh at us. How about one big and three small? 3 small kingdoms is too hard to pronounce. It's better to give them a new title. I agree. I think the empire is very good. The ministers discussed eagerly, and the atmosphere at the long table seemed to be a little high. Roland did not deliberately stop them. Instead, he left some time for them to enjoy the aftertaste of victory before he brought the topic back to business. But I hope that everyone realizes that this victory is just the beginning, not the end. Driving the demons out of the fertile plains was a relatively safe place to live, but it did not mean that they would give up on conquering human beings. The real threat was the legendary Battle of Divine Will. Only when the bloody moon came would the enemy show all his fangs. For that day to come, the kingdom must be fully prepared now. In other words, not only can you not relax in the slightest, you have to double your efforts. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty, everyone exclaimed. Roland looked around the hall and nodded to Nightingale. The latter turned around and pulled open the curtain hanging on the wall. The place where the map of the western region was originally hung was replaced by a huge blackboard. And there was only one word on the blackboard. People. This is what I want, Roland said word by word. He had so many plans to implement the stability of the western region, the unification of the internal affairs, the return of the army, and the people's hearts, but none of them was more important than increasing the population. In order to implement this policy as soon as possible, he even put the war summary and other matters on the back of the schedule. It could be said that the population had become the biggest bottleneck of Neverwinter's development. If the First Army had an armored unit in Operation Torch, even the simplest infantry fighting vehicle, they would have been able to defeat the demons' anti-ambush trap. Although there were a lot of reliability problems in the first-generation piston engine that had been finalized, these were all minor details in the war. Whether or not they existed was the most important issue. Roland was aware of this, but Neverwinter's production capacity had reached its limit. Whether it was the steel output or the production capacity of each factory. In the last battle, 90% of the accumulated ammunition had been used up. A railroad across the plains had used up most of the steel reserves. Agatha's cooling separation method was gradually unable to meet the needs of the chemical plant to produce acid. The production of individual grenades had also taken up a part of the production of explosives, which was already stretched thin. It could be said that Neverwinter had reached its limit in many aspects. It needed manpower to expand the production scale. It needed manpower to add new production projects. And it needed the cooperation of many departments and a large number of people to turn ideas and blueprints into reality. The population of Neverwinter was still growing steadily. At present, it had exceeded the 200,000 mark, which was an incredible number compared to other cities. In another decade or so, Neverwinter would become the core of the whole continent, and it would have no problem to have a population of more than 1 million. If not for the unexpected turn of events in the northern expedition, he would probably have accepted this result. However, the fact was that the demon's actions had deviated from everyone's expectations. Although the reason was not clear, Roland felt a little uneasy. Even if the demons had gathered a large army and fought with the first army in Tequila, causing more than half of the soldiers to be killed or wounded, and it would have taken them more than half a year to capture the city, it would have been more reassuring. Long-term battles were part of the plan. But the demons did not do that. The deviation from the strategic plan meant that the situation had changed in some invisible places. The uneasiness brought by the unknown made him unable to be satisfied with the current growth rate. Coupled with the return of the army, he decided to take some extreme measures to shorten the process. Your Majesty, this has always been the focus of the administrative office. Barav stood up and replied. According to the statistics, the inflow of foreign population has not only not stopped, but is also steadily increasing. It is estimated that in 5 years the population will double. I can't wait for 5 years, Roland interrupted him. If possible, I hope to achieve or even exceed this goal within this year. Everyone could not help but gasp. 200,000 people a year? Your Majesty, I'm afraid it's difficult to achieve, the director said hesitantly. To achieve the inflow trend you mentioned, it's not possible to have such a large-scale migration unless there is a riot or famine. You're talking about natural changes, but I'm talking about the administrative order. If we implement coercive measures, it's not a difficult goal to achieve. In a nutshell, this long-term plan can be divided into 3 parts. Roland held up 3 fingers and said in turn. Chapter 1177. I will only mention the framework and basic requirements here. You will decide how to implement it. The person in charge is Barav Mons. Yes, sir. The director hurriedly put his hand on his chest. Roland nodded with satisfaction. After so many years of experience, Barav had developed the habit of complying and doing his best to carry out his orders, no matter how unreasonable they sounded. The interconnected structure of the administrative office was also enough to support the resources needed to concentrate efforts on something big. Then listen carefully. Roland gestured to Nightingale to paste the white cloth she had prepared in advance on the blackboard. First is the equivalent migration within the Kingdom of Grey Castle. Oh! Everyone's eyes lit up when they saw the content on the cloth. The white cloth explained several characteristics of the policy in the form of pictures and text. It was concise and clear, and it could be said to be clear at a glance. This was the original manual version of the PowerPoint presentation. And it was Soroya who provided the technical support. As a drawing dog who once mingled in the Design Institute, making a PowerPoint to fool the client was just a basic skill. Compared to boring empty talk that easily lost key information, this kind of explanation was obviously more attractive. The population distribution of Grey Castle had obvious characteristics of the times. After a great noble became a lord, he would gradually build a city, and the surrounding land would be in fief to the lower nobles, and so on. With the growth of the population and the accumulation of wealth, the consumption of the big city would become higher and higher, to the point that it could no longer maintain the supply, so the burden would be transferred to the surrounding villages and towns, and finally, the majority of the people supported a small number of people. This situation not only limited the size of the city, but also basically solidified the flow of class. Those big cities seemed to have a large population and were very lively, but compared to the independent small towns. In fact, the total population of the surrounding towns and villages was far greater than the city they supported. But Roland also knew that this kind of backwardness had nothing to do with right or wrong. It was purely caused by low productivity. In a situation where the level of production could not meet the requirements of the reform, most of the labor force was firmly tied to the land, and they could only enjoy a small portion of their output for the rest of their harvest to be handed over to the nobles to maintain their dignified lives. During the recruitment of refugees in the past few years, the administrative office had also paid attention to the changes in the local population and made a rough estimate. The final conclusion was that the population of Greycastle should be between 2 to 4 million. During this period, the war between the second prince and the third princess, as well as the plague released by the church, had caused about 500,000 to 600,000 deaths. It had also turned the Eagle City in the south and the Valencia in the east into ruins. Even so, there was still a large number of people scattered all over Greycastle, and only a small portion of them flowed into the western region. And now, he did not intend to let this situation continue. The distribution and planting of the golden number 2 wheat seeds would bear fruit in another month. In other words, they could already predict the arrival of a bumper harvest. High-yield cotton had also been fully spread in the port of Clearwater, and it wouldn't be long before they were able to deliver a sufficient amount of cloth to all parts of the kingdom. Big cities no longer needed 10 times their population to supply supplies. Now the output of one person was equivalent to the hard work of 10, or even 20 people in the past. In addition, the nominal unification of Greycastle had been completed. The power of all the regions had been returned to the central government, and the fief no longer belonged to the Lord of China. Instead, it was a subordinate administrative organization that obeyed his orders. Now it could be said that the hardware and software of the forced migration were in place, and it was the best time to implement it. The so-called equal migration, in short, was to give the immigrants equal conditions to reduce the dissatisfaction caused by the forced migration. For example, if the immigrants had a residence in the village and 2 acres of land, the administrative office would also allocate the same resources to them in the newly developed land after they came to Neverwinter. This would not only speed up the development of the Northwest Plains, but also effectively relieve the shortage of manpower in Neverwinter. Of course, no matter how nice the plan sounded, Roland knew that forced migration was the real meaning of it. Whether they were willing or not, they had to leave their familiar homeland and go to a strange city with confusion and anxiety. This process was destined to be a difficult one. Driving people out of their land and forcing them to go to the city and work in factories was not as simple as freeing them from their shackles. This period of change in history could be described as extremely bloody. First, the land cultivated by the villagers was taken back, occupied, and expelled, so that they had nothing but themselves. Then they were restricted by laws and whips. Some countries even issued laws that allowed those who had not worked for a long time to be executed to force them to join the mass production. Although Roland knew that he could not do that and planned to compensate them after the migration, he would not change the original intention of the forced migration. He knew very well what he was doing. As for the second cross-border conscription, it was the foreign version of the forced migration. Unlike the Kingdom of Dawn, which was the least affected, the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart had both been wiped out by the Church and lost their legal rulers. According to the information collected by Hill, these 2 kingdoms had not yet returned to normal. There were many feudal lords in different places, and all the powerful lords claimed that they had found the illegitimate bloodline of the late king. It was obvious that they were in a state of division, and no one was willing to submit to the other. As a result, the plan of acting king like the one in the Kingdom of Dawn was obviously not feasible. Do you mean, we'll send the first army? Barav was slightly surprised to see the new white cloth. Do you think those nobles will sit back and watch us take away their property? Roland took a sip of tea and said matter-of-factly, I think they don't care about anything except power, wealth, and more territory, whether it's demons or the battle of divine will. Of course, we still have to reason with them. As for whether they will listen to us or not, that's another matter. I'll let them listen, Your Majesty, Iron Axe said seriously. There was no doubt that the cross-border conscription would be much more blatant than the internal migration. Without golden twos to ensure food production, when a large number of people moved away, the urban ecosystem would collapse due to lack of supplies. This was no different from a war. The only difference was that the cost of plundering was much lower than occupying. The First Army was the most powerful guarantee for the implementation of this plan. The total population of the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart was about 3 million. Excluding the unfortunate people who died in the war with the Church, at least 1.5 million new laborers could be injected into Neverwinter. This great migration might take several years to complete, but it was the most direct part of the improvement. Roland had the spare capacity to extend his influence beyond the borders, which was why he set the goal of doubling the population within a year, or even half a year for Barov. Your Majesty, do you have any specific requirements for the conscription? The director asked. For example, craftsmen, farmers, or literate people. There had been similar screening in the past, but at that time, it was because he was short of money. Now the situation was completely different. No. Roland stretched out his hand and clenched his fist. I want all of them. I see. Barov wiped the sweat off his forehead. Next is the last one. He asked Nightingale to put on the last PowerPoint with the white cloth. The administrative office should encourage the people to have children by means of publicity, tax reduction, and rewards. Compared with the previous two policies, it won't be effective in a short time, but it's the most important part of the whole plan. Chapter 1178. There was a burst of good-natured laughter. With the rapid expansion of the administrative office, the average age of the officials had also decreased. Coupled with the implementation of the assessment system, the younger generation had shown natural advantages in terms of learning knowledge and the ability to accept new things. It was not impossible for them to complete primary education at the age of 20 and become a grassroots clerk. It was not impossible for them to be promoted to department cadres or even corps officials at the age of 25. In fact, there were many young faces in the castle's conference hall. Looking at the slightly flushed and embarrassed new generation of officials, Roland could not help but raise the corner of his mouth. Although this group of people was not as mature as the older generation, their vitality and tenacity could bring unparalleled vitality to the entire organization, which was also the most important temperament for a new government. In short, increasing the population of Neverwinter as much as possible is the goal for everyone, including the planning and construction of housing and supporting facilities. Doubling the population is not the end, and I won't set a goal. You just need to know that the more the number, the better. So your own struggle is also a part of it. After the laughter subsided, he concluded, considering that it is easier to pronounce the whole number, let's call it the million plan for now. Yes, Your Majesty. The officials placed their hands on their chests in unison. The following government decrees were all supplements or extensions of the million plan, such as the exploration of the resources on the fertile plains, the establishment of many full-time schools and specialized schools, and the further standardization of universal education. Medical personnel were transferred from military training to civilian recruitment, and small clinics were set up in new residential areas to share the burden of the only medical hospital. At the same time, the Ministry of Education added a secondary subject, medicine, which was selected from the field first aid team for semi-self-study training, and the relevant textbooks were collected from the dream world. And so on. Expanding a city with a population of 200,000 into a city with a population of 400,000, or even a million, was not as simple as a change in numbers. The expansion of the residential area required more infrastructure to operate effectively, otherwise the sewage and excrement alone could destroy the livable environment that had been built with great difficulty. The high concentration of the population put forward higher requirements for health and epidemic prevention. Even with Lily's ability, monitoring and forecasting was also a problem that needed to be explored. The importance of education was self-evident. Without widespread literacy education, the population would only be a burden, not an aid to industrial production. This was also the reason why he pointed out that this meeting was only a framework. Building a large city with a population of 1 million was not something that could be decided in 1 or 2 meetings. In order to find a suitable path for Grey Castle, the administrative office had to keep exploring and practicing. While everyone was excited about the plan to build the largest city in history, Bhairav suddenly asked hesitantly, "Your Majesty, are you going to send all these people to the factory?" Roland nodded. "Or the engineering team, the First Army, the Research Institute. As long as it's useful. But that may cause the administrative office to fall into a predicament of insufficient funds." The director hesitated. Nowadays, the main income of the administrative office comes from the sale of chaos drinks, perfume, steam engines, and other commodities. As you know, the latter is realized through the Joint Chamber of Commerce. The payment is made every 3 to 6 months, and the people's salary is fixed every month. The amount is about 80,000 golden dragon. Currently, the former is far greater than the latter, so we don't have to worry about the stock of funds. But if the number of people doubles, the situation will be different. Are you worried that if the payment is delayed for a few months, Neverwinter won't be able to pay the salary? Roland raised his eyebrows and asked with interest. Bhairav was indeed an assistant to the Minister of Finance for many years. Roland was delighted that he could link the population plan to the economic problem so quickly. "Exactly," Bhairav wrote on the notebook as he said. "And the salary will continue to increase with the number of years of service, so the expenditure will only increase. But the total production of chaos drinks is limited. Adding the 1,000,000 chaos drinks to the plan will greatly reduce the purchasing power of the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and the future income will inevitably decline. I'm afraid that the reserve funds of the administrative office will not be much. I estimated that for every 100,000 people in a year, the risk will sharply increase by 30%. Unless you can find a new source of income." Hearing this, Nightingale's eyes lit up. She bent down and whispered in his ear, "There was an unexploited gold mine in the former territory of my family." Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry. "I'm not that poor. It doesn't matter. If you need it, just use it." "Ahem. Don't worry. I won't hesitate to use it when I really need it. But not now," Roland replied in a low voice. Then he looked at Bhairav and said, "In fact, I already have a plan for this, and I can solve the problem that you're worried about once and for all." "Once and for all?" The old director was startled. "Yes. As you can see, the problem is that the income can't keep up with the expenditure. If we can have unlimited income, this problem will be equivalent to no longer exist, right? After all, there was no faster way to get rich than printing money. When the productivity developed to a certain level, the problem of the precious metal currency would inevitably arise. Limited by the mining and smelting level, the output of precious metal would generally be maintained at a stable level. However, when the production technology improved by leaps and bounds, it was very likely that in a short period of time, goods with a value far higher than the value of the currency would be produced. When all the precious metal currencies added up together could not keep up with the output of goods, the payment system would automatically collapse. However, the credit currency did not have this limitation. The point notes that he had previously given to the witches were an experiment. The results showed that even if they used ordinary paper, as long as they were matched with Dark Cloud's ink, Anna's engravings, and the anti-counterfeiting mark made by the rubberworm's mucus, it was basically impossible to forge the notes. Otherwise, the chaos drinks in the castle's convenience store would have long been sold out. After eliminating this problem, Neverwinter had the foundation to issue the credit currency. Roland had originally planned to discuss the details with Bhairav after he sorted out the basic rules of the currency, such as the currency's style, value, and exchange rules. However, now that Bhairav had brought up this problem, he did not mind revealing some information first. Just when Roland was about to briefly explain his idea to the confused ministers, the door of the meeting room was suddenly pushed open and Phyllis quickly walked in. "Your Majesty, there's a new intelligence report from the front. Pasha hopes that you and your subordinates can immediately go to the underground hall. So urgent." Chapter 1179. In the core hall of the third border city. As soon as Roland and the others walked out of the long and narrow underground passage, they heard a hysterical scream. "This is?" Vendi asked in surprise. "The wail of Cabra Dabi," answered Phyllis, who was leading the way. "It broke down completely when Ursruk was defeated. It not only kept silent but also tried to commit suicide many times. It took us a while to subdue it. I suddenly think it's not a bad idea to keep it alive, Tilly said expressionlessly. The current situation is that it has to be alive. Phyllis nodded openly. The discovery of the secret letter is an excellent opportunity for us to learn more about the enemy, and even master their language and writing. This is an opportunity that the Union has been longing for, but never got. I didn't expect Caberdabi to cooperate with you, Nightingale exclaimed. No, it didn't. The process is a little complicated. You'll understand when you see it. They walked to the interrogation table and saw Scourge, who had been possessed by the senior demon, tied to a metal stand with a pipe inserted into its abdomen. Scourge's eyelids were forced open, and in front of him was a stack of papers with strange characters written on them. Is this the secret letter that Summer recreated? Vendi asked. Yes, it was discovered in the air. If it weren't for Maggie's sharp eyes, we would have missed it. It was Agatha who answered. Her face was a little pale, and her eyes were slightly dark. It seemed that she had not rested for a long time in order to decipher the information in the letter. After learning that the battle was over, Roland immediately sent the Neverwinter detective group to the front line to help the army collect information that was difficult to obtain by normal means. Compared to the words that were revealed to the human beings, the clues left by accident were undoubtedly much more reliable. Since Summer's magic power was limited, Roland had focused on the battle between the sniper team and the enemy, and how the Magic Slayer had set up the ambush and deceived Sylvie. However, the response to this move far exceeded his expectations. He did not expect that on the evening of the second day before the final battle, Osrook would sit on the giant skeleton and write this personal letter to the setting sun. This scene was also recorded accurately by Scene Rewind. Aha! Cool. Caberdabi howled again, twisting its body and struggling to turn its head away. Agatha nodded at Breeze. The latter stomped his feet, and the senior demon immediately shut its mouth. I see. You used Hifeng to control its movements and forced it to read the secret letter? Nightingale suddenly understood. Then, with the help of Lady Camilla's telepathic connection, repeatedly feel her first reaction when she sees the words. Celine added, although this guy is trying to confuse his consciousness, as long as we change the content of the words and compare them many times, we can determine which thoughts are real and which are imaginary. To be honest, it was thanks to His Majesty that he came up with this idea. Me. Roland was stunned. You wrote in your intermediate biology textbook that as long as a dog sees a piece of meat, it will secrete a lot of gastric juice, whether it has eaten the meat or not. This kind of conditional reaction is a common characteristic of all living creatures. It seems that the demons are no exception. It was through this method that we were able to piece together the contents of the letter from the minds of the senior demons who were completely uncooperative and understand their language. Without Lady Camilla's help, I'm afraid that this process would have taken a long time. Then she waved her main tentacle at the chief steward of Sleeping Island to show her gratitude. I just hope I can help Lady Tilly, the latter said, biting her lip. This is what witches are capable of, but full of limitations. Roland thought. Their unique characteristics made it impossible for any of them to be the same. If they lacked a key ability, they might not be able to be awakened even after hundreds of years. There might have been witches similar to Camilla Derry in the past 2 battles of divine will, but they were probably born at the wrong time. By the time they awakened, the situation was already in a disadvantageous position, and humans could no longer catch a living senior demon. Perhaps Osrook focused on eliminating witches because of this. But, in the eyes of the demons, could Ashes, Sylvie, and the other witches really be as valuable as Tequila? The obelisk needed God's stone mines to build. Once Tequila was occupied, the red mist it produced would cover the entrance of the impassable mountain range. At that time, the devil beasts could easily cross the mountains and invade the hinterland of the 4 kingdoms. It would undoubtedly be hundreds of times more difficult for humans to drive the demons out of the fertile plains. This was also the opinion of the general staff and the ancient witches of Tequila. Perhaps the clue as to why there was such a big difference in their judgment was in the letter. Then tell me in detail what you've deciphered, Roland said slowly. As the sentences were separated and then pieced back together, the content of the letter was not complete. It was a little disjointed, but it was enough for everyone to understand. As Celine reconstructed the sentences into his mind, Roland could not help but have the illusion that she was whispering into his ear. Skylord, the decisive battle is coming soon. I've made sufficient preparations, both for the enemies and for myself. In the past month, I've heard the call of, more than once. The omen is so clear, perhaps I will usher in a breakthrough in this battle. I know this will bring you criticism, but it will not affect your plan for the Western Front. If we succeed, the enemies will lose the means they rely on, and we will regain the upper hand in the battle. If we increase the number of troops tenfold, the humans will definitely lose. But this battle is not without suspense. If I fail, please treat the humans as an opponent on par with us and annihilate them, even if we have to give up the fathomless abyss. As long as we can obtain their legacy shards, we still have the hope of defeating the Sky-Sea realm. Finally, please send my regards to the King and Lord Nightmare. When Osrook finished displaying the entire letter, Roland felt a layer of cold sweat oozing out of his back. He finally knew why Phyllis was so anxious. From the result, the enemy had undoubtedly failed. Not only did it not wipe out the sniper squad, but it had also died in the hands of Ashes. But this also meant that the situation had been led to the second hypothesis. Although there were still some uncertainties, the meaning of the sentence seemed to be urging its people to give up the battle with the Sky-Sea realm and treat the humans as the top enemy, attacking and annihilating them? Damn it! What a joke! Roland suddenly felt a great pressure. This was probably the worst news since the start of the war. I'm afraid we have to give up the development plan of the fertile plains, Vendi murmured. If the enemies go all out, it's too risky to build the residential area outside the impasse defense line. But how do we solve their need for the red mist? The demons can build the obelisk in Starfall City to relieve the pressure at the front. But that way, the red mist won't be able to cover the fertile plains, so we can still delay until the next battle of divine will. This is no different from the previous plan, right? The difference is that we'll be facing the demons' entire main force. Chapter 1180. Roland looked at the Pearl of the Northern region in surprise. After the ambush team was ambushed by Osrook, there was a wave of criticism among the higher-ups. They believed that the general staff, especially Edith Kant, was responsible for the misjudgment. Apart from the administrative office, there were also voices of dissatisfaction and doubt in the sleeping spell. If not for Tilly's prestige, the impact would have been even greater. When Edith returned from the front line, she even asked for punishment, but not only did he not agree, he even suppressed the series of repercussions. This was because it was not a man-made mistake. Not to mention that victory and defeat were commonplace, Operation Torch was not even a failure, but a complete victory. At the cost of less than 500 people, they had eliminated nearly 20,000 demons and successfully completed their mission, taking back the holy city that had been lost for hundreds of years. If this couldn't be considered a victory, then what could be considered a victory? The general staff's contribution was obvious to all. In fact, Roland had discussed this issue with Tilly, Agatha, Alethea, and the others in private. They also believed that the deviation in the strategic judgment was caused by some unknown factors. If it were the era of the Union, the demons would not have given up the opportunity to conquer the continent just because of a few witches, not even the 3 chiefs. But even so, Edith was still in the limelight for a period of time. Besides, she had indeed lost to Osrook in this duel. Roland thought that she would be depressed for a while, or perhaps talk less and listen more to prevent being criticized again. He did not expect that she had no intention of backing down, and the moment she opened her mouth, her opinion was different from the others. What's the problem? First of all, the last 2 sentences. Edith lowered her head and walked 2 steps. If we succeed, we will increase the number of troops tenfold. If we fail, we should go all out. Isn't it too strange? Since the demon's ultimate goal is to destroy humans, then Tequila should be as important as we expected. No matter how great the pressure from the Sky-Sea realm is, They shouldn't have given up so hastily. After all, in this letter, the enemy suggested to go all out to destroy us. Vendi was startled. Indeed. Why didn't they do that earlier? Because the supply of red mist can't keep up? Nightingale supported her chin with her fingers. It's unlikely that they'll go all out, but if it's 10 times the number of troops, as long as more transport troops are invested, it's not impossible. Not to mention that they have new war machines like the giant skeletons. Agatha frowned. It took us more than half a year to get from Tower Station number 1 to Tower Station number 10. That's more than enough time for the demons to make their choice. The General Staff's initial judgment came from Kabardabi's confession. The demons were stalled by the Sky-Sea realm, and the outcome of the war was a matter of life and death for them. Edith looked at the glaring high-level devil on the interrogation platform. But from this letter, even if they were to lose to the Sky-Sea realm, they wouldn't be wiped out. They might even have the chance to turn defeat into victory. So why didn't the enemy reinforce the tequila from the start? It doesn't make sense. From the point of view of intention and behavior, the two are contradictory. Everyone could not help but ponder. And this sentence, I know this will bring you criticism, but it won't affect your plan on the Western Front, Edith said after a moment of silence. It doesn't sound like a problem, but when you think about it carefully, something doesn't feel right. In order to deal with the infiltrating witches, the tequila is a real matter. How can it not affect the plan? Maybe Osrook is fooling his superior? Roland said thoughtfully. Nobles often do that. Your Majesty, please think of it as the most difficult enemy, Edith said seriously. If you can't imagine it, just think of it as me among the demons. Do you think I would do such a thing? Looking at her slightly clenched fists, Roland suddenly understood a lot. It turned out that she was not as calm as she looked on the surface, nor was she completely unaffected by the gossip behind her back. Instead, she was suppressing her anger in her heart. She did not want to lose to the senior demon lord. Well, since they're not fooling around, it means that tequila can be replaced in the plan. In this case, the demons must have found a way to attack the Four Kingdoms without the red mist and the obelisk, Roland said with a sigh. We discussed this at the beginning of Operation Torch. Agatha sighed. I still think it's impossible. Otherwise, why would they send troops to the tequila? If the red mist can't restrain the demons, they should have spread all over the world. Why are you all talking about the impact? While everyone was deep in thought, Nightingale asked confusedly, Isn't the Western Front even stranger? If the demons are facing us, the west of Neverwinter should be their east, right? Location is always relative, and the world is not a flat board, Celine explained patiently. The demons came from another continent. If Osrook sees it as the center, not to mention the tequila, even the Four Kingdoms and most of the Land of Dawn are considered to be in the west. So that's how it is. That means they're not the same thing, right? Wait, what did you say? Edith suddenly looked up. They're not the same thing? Nightingale asked uncertainly. The Pearl of the Northern Region's eyes lit up. She walked quickly to a long table with many maps piled up on it. She unrolled the papers one by one, glanced at them, and then threw them aside. Finally, her eyes stopped on a very abstract drawing. Roland looked at it for a while before he could recognize that it was a map of the entire kingdom of Everwinter based on the handwriting on it. She pointed at the blank area north of the Snow Ridge, which was the northernmost part of the kingdom of Everwinter. She turned to Celine and asked, What's on it? Mountains. They stretch for thousands of miles, like the back of a hedgehog. From south to north, they almost encircle one side of the Land of Dawn. We also call it the spine of the continent. Has the Union explored this area before? Of course. The Quest Society once drew a map of the entire Land of Dawn, including the spine of the continent. Just drawing a map? Edith asked eagerly. Is there no more specific record? What are you trying to say? Agatha asked confusedly. It's not easy to make a map. There are not only a lot of mountains but also a lot of them. The impassable mountain range can be seen as the tail of the mountain, and the widest part of the mountain is enough to fit the entire Grey Castle. The mountains are very steep, and most of them are covered by snow all year round. What's the point of marking every mountain? I think we may have overlooked something. The Sky Lord's Western Front plan may not be referring to the Tequila ruins, but to the overall offensive against the humans. The Tequila ruins is just one of the options. Edith's finger slid along the impassable mountain range. The demon's goal is to prevent the red mist from passing through this natural barrier. If they can get close enough to the Four Kingdoms, it won't matter if they can build a city or not. They just need to find a chance to erect an obelisk. You mean? Agatha's expression changed. Chapter 1181. This. The ancient witches looked at each other. Finally, Pasha said, "We can't rule out this possibility. Let me ask you a question first. How did you find the God's Stone of Retaliation veins in the past?" Roland asked. "The method we used 1,000 years ago is untraceable, but I think we probably relied on luck," Celine replied. After the Union came into being, the Quest Society was also established. Searching for the God's Stone of Retaliation veins was one of our main tasks. Roland could not help but think of the triangular positioning map that marked Tequila, the Misty Forest, and the North Slope Mountain Mine. It was through this map that lightning found Agatha in the ice. The buried ancient history was also connected to the present world at that moment. Because the God's Stone of Retaliation has a strong shielding effect, we used this feature to carry out the search. 600 or 700 years ago, witches like Sylvie, Nightingale, Lightning, and Isabella could all become explorers. During peacetime, as many as 100 witches searched and found 6 veins, 3 of which were suitable for building large cities, Celine continued. Later, we came into contact with the magic technology of the underground civilization, and began to search with the magic core. As long as we modulated the core ability appropriately, we could sense within a range of about 100 kilometers. The southern end of the Misty Forest and the Hermes Plateau were the 2 results. Unfortunately, by then, the bloody moon had arrived and the demons had destroyed everything we had accumulated. So, exploring the ridge area is really not very meaningful for the Union, Roland said slowly. Ordinary people can't enter, and witches can't take care of everything. However, it should be very inconvenient for the demons to erect an obelisk in this place. That's right. Edith nodded. At least, it's unlikely that all the demons will be mobilized. But if he wanted to replace Tequila to a certain extent and achieve the goal of eradicating the human race, this was the only place he could choose. In addition, how many troops the demons can station in the mountains depends on how long they have been preparing. If the Western Front plan mentioned by Osrook included many preparations from the beginning. That was at least half a year ago, Ironax said in a low voice. Your Majesty, I understand. Roland looked at everyone. Regardless of whether the Pearl of the Northern Region's speculation was correct or not, this was information that needed to be confirmed. After all, this matter involved the other 3 kingdoms, as well as the strategic direction for the next 100 years. If the enemy really intended to invade the human territory from the ridge of the continent, and Neverwinter had invested a large amount of resources in the construction of the defensive line on the fertile plains, it would undoubtedly be a disaster from which no one could recover. Now listen to my command. Yes, Your Majesty. The witches and the higher-ups of Neverwinter answered in unison. Vendi, inform Lightning and Maggie who are still at the front line to return to Neverwinter as soon as possible. Understood, I'll go now. Ironax, the migration should be carried out as soon as possible. There's no harm in doing it thoroughly. Understood. Finally, I need Tequila to provide me with a magic core, he said to Pasha. Considering that aerial reconnaissance may miss some information, I need your help to eliminate the hidden danger completely. At your service, Your Majesty. Celine called out to Roland just as everyone was about to leave. I have something to show you. Following the man to the underground laboratory, he was surprised to see that the table in the lead chamber was filled with 4 yellow stones that looked similar to the magic ceremony cube. You've assembled 4 Rubik's cubes? He couldn't wait to step forward and pick up a stone to play with. Compared to the sample found in the cursed temple, the replica Rubik's cube was sharper, and the lines were more distinct. It had a brand new vibe to it. Yes, but their properties are slightly different. I think it might have something to do with the raw materials. Maybe the radioactive race added something else to the materials when they made the samples. However, this difference won't affect its usage. I've already tested it on chickens. It's good to have a difference. Roland mourned for the chicken in his heart for a second. After all, boiling water requires endurance, not lethality. You can continue your research in this direction. No problem. Do you still need these trial products? Of course. This is the dawn of a new energy source. Roland praised generously. The success of the replica Rubik's Cube is unparalleled. Your achievement alone will be remembered by future generations. The next step was to design a device to convert the heat released by the Rubik's Cube into kinetic energy. If he could succeed in this step, the industry of Neverwinter would usher in a new wave of revolution. Thinking of this, Roland looked at Celine's bloated body with regret. You should have been on the platform in the central square, receiving the cheers and congratulations of the people, and your name should have been on the list of outstanding contributions to Neverwinter. There's nothing to be sorry about, Your Majesty. I made up my mind the day I decided to become the original carrier. Celine smiled. It's just my job. Besides, you fulfilled my wish in the dream world. Soon, Roland's order was translated into the will of the kingdom, which radiated from Neverwinter to the rest of the country. At the top of the castle, more than 10 birds would soar into the sky every day and fly to the northeast with secret letters. Every port and every fleet would contribute their strength to the Great Migration. The First Army would take paddle steamers to the port of Clearwater, Seawinshire, and other port towns in batches. There, they would transfer to seagoing ships and set off for the north. Even though the specific plan had not been formulated at the moment, and some of the junior officers did not even know what they were going to do, but with just a single order, they led the soldiers who had just finished their vacation to regroup and set off on a journey to a foreign country. In the city of Glow in the Kingdom of Dawn, after receiving the secret letter from Hill Fox, Horford Quinn immediately summoned his son and said, "Go to Seaside Bay and Dragon Castle immediately, and ask the local lords to provide supplies to all the ships passing by Grey Castle. Also, at least one dock will be empty for their exclusive use. The royal family will pay for all the expenses." "Father, are you sure?" Horn frowned. "This is a lot of money, and setting up a dedicated dock will affect the loading and unloading of other merchant ships." "That's enough." Horford interrupted his son. "Just do as I say." The latter bit his lip and finally bowed his head. "Yes, father." When he walked to the door, he asked reluctantly, "At least tell me what Grey Castle wants to do, right?" However, there was only silence behind him. Horford did not breathe a sigh of relief until the door was closed. He got up, walked to the window, and looked in the direction of the neighboring country. The world order is going to change. At the same time, in the underground karst area on the outskirts of the city of Glow, Banach Lothar sat in his wheelchair and looked coldly at the 200 or so silencers and the 20 masked managers. This was the power he had accumulated for decades, and it was also the foundation of his foothold in the Black Money Chamber of Commerce. Over the years, we have bet a lot on the forces in the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter. Now it's time to reap the benefits. After staring for a long time, Banach said in a hoarse voice, "According to reliable information, Grey Castle's troops will soon enter the territories of these two kingdoms. No matter what they want to do, your task is to provide as much help as possible, money, food, information. Whatever they need, Black Money must do its best to satisfy them. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Very good. Go." Without any hesitation, everyone bowed and quickly disappeared into the cave that extended in all directions. Banach took out an empty bottle from his pocket. This was the 5th bottle of potion they had sent to him since he killed Apenmoya for the oracle. One more bottle, and God will accept me into the immortal realm," he murmured in his heart as he clenched the bottle with trembling hands. Chapter 1182. 2 days after the order was issued, Lightning and Maggie returned to Neverwinter before the storm swept across the entire human continent. When the two of them walked into the office, Roland could not help but be stunned. Maggie had not changed much, except that she was much bigger than half a year ago. She looked more like a goose than a pigeon when she squatted on her partner's head. To his surprise, it was the lightning. Her hair had grown a lot longer and hung down from her ears to her shoulders, probably because she had been on a reconnaissance mission for a long time. She barely had time to take care of her hair. Her face was also dirty, and her flight suit was patched up. There were a few simple and ugly bags on her thighs, chest and arms, which seemed to have been sewn by herself. Although she looked much more cumbersome than the beautiful and novel coat she had worn in the beginning, she looked more like an explorer now. But the biggest change was in her eyes and expression. It was as if she had changed from the image in his memory, and was no longer the little girl in the past. "Your Majesty, what can I do for you?" Lightning asked after bowing to Roland. "If the demons really have this plan, the consequences will be unimaginable. So I hope you two can go to the Kingdom of Everwinter and investigate the mountains in the north that no one has ever set foot in. The demons can't live without the supply of red mist. If they want to enter the mountains, they must leave some traces." There's actually such a thing. Lightning could not help but frown. Fortunately, Maggie found the letter. "But Your Majesty, what if the demons go underground? My ability is limited, and it's hard to find a hidden target in the air." "That's the worst-case scenario," Edith said. Judging from the result of Operation Torch, the demons' digging ability was far inferior to that of human beings who had devouring worms. But looking at the whole picture, it was unlikely that the demons, who had occupied half of the Land of Dawn and had a deeper understanding of magic power, did not find any underground civilization ruins. Since the Union could find worm carriers through exploring the ruins, the demons must have the same possibility. No traces of the carrier were found in the Tequila battle, but it did not mean that there were none in the ridge of the continent. The gods' punishment witches will set off from the shallow port with a magic core. If you don't find the enemy, that will be the last resort. "I see. I will try my best." Lightning nodded. "However, it will take at least a month to travel from the south of Grey Castle to the north of Everwinter. During this time, you might not be able to receive reinforcements and supplies in time. In addition, I'm afraid that the residents there are still prejudices against witches. Even if you stay in the city, it's not necessarily safe. You must be careful." "Wilderness survival is an explorer's special skill, Your Majesty," she said without hesitation. "Not to mention a month, even a year and a half is not a problem." "Cuckoo." Maggie flapped her wings in agreement. "I'm sorry," Roland sighed. "You've just come back, and I'm asking you to go somewhere further. Your Majesty, you're too kind." Lightning turned her head and her voice became a little low. Compared to those who sacrificed themselves to fight against the demons, compared to Sister Ashes, this is nothing. But after a while she regained her spirit and said, "Since this is a new expedition, then according to the usual practice, can you?" Roland was a little startled and then reacted. "Of course." He stood up and walked out from behind the desk. Lightning raised her hand, but when she saw the stains on her sleeves, she suddenly retracted her hand. No need. I forgot to change my clothes first. The smell on my body is quite unpleasant. Forget it." However, before she could finish her words, Roland had reached out and hugged her. "Thank you. I'll ask the tailor to make you a few more flying jackets according to the current style. You can wear them in turns in the wilderness." Lightning suddenly quieted down. After a long time, she said in a low nasal voice, "Okay. Me too, Koo." Maggie stretched out her head. "You've worked hard too." Roland stroked her plump neck and smooth wings. Nightingale then came up and hugged them. "Be careful." "We will." After they left the office, Nightingale said with a sigh, "Lightning used to never say that her ability was limited." Roland nodded sympathetically. If it were the little girl in the past, she would have patted her chest and said, "Leave it to me." He had heard from Leaf that after Ashes and Osrook died together, Lightning cried so hard that she could not speak. She did not recover for several days. But now looking at her, there was no trace of her being immersed in grief. Even when Ashes was mentioned, she would still feel sad, but the sadness obviously would not hinder her progress. Instead, it became her motivation. "She's grown up," Roland said with a sigh. Although it would be better to move the immigrants as soon as possible, the journey from Grey Castle to the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter would take months. No matter how hard the administrative office and the First Army tried, the population problem in Neverwinter could not be solved in a short time. This not only hindered many new projects that had been planned for a long time, but also limited the expansion of the existing industries. Moreover, the demon's threat did not disappear with the tequila's victory as expected. All these problems piled up and put a lot of pressure on Roland. Fortunately, the successful imitation of the magic ceremony cube provided him with a way to promote his magic power. As long as there was no plan for him to confirm, he would stay in Anna's North Slope laboratory and try to make a new generation of power source using the magic cube as the core. After sending Lightning, Maggie, and the Roland with the magic core, he spent most of his time on this project. After all, once the magic steam engine made a breakthrough, it would bring more benefits than any other project. Besides Anna, Celine also volunteered to participate in this epic-making research. Since the laboratory was located in a remote area and was heavily guarded, they did not have to worry about being accidentally seen by the subjects. The assembly ability that she demonstrated during the research was also truly amazing. The dozens of auxiliary tentacles were not only extremely strong, but also more flexible than fingers. Installing large components such as flywheels and pistons was effortless, which greatly reduced Anna's burden. For a period of time, the scene of a man, a woman, and a tentacle monster working around a machine became a common sight. Chapter 1183. Anna circled the prototype twice and accurately described her first impression. "It's so small, but it's indescribably beautiful," Celine said thoughtfully. "Especially the dense pipes around it. They're like tentacles." Roland could not help laughing. Their observations were completely different, but their conclusions were very accurate. They both expressed the features of the new machine in a concise manner. Compared with the first cast iron steam engine Anna had made, the prototype was more than 10 times smaller. This was partly due to the great leap in processing technology, but the main reason was that it did not have to use a boiler. The current steam engine in Neverwinter had been developed to the 4th generation, but the boiler had not changed much. Whether it was used to burn coke, firewood, or heavy oil, a large combustion chamber and steam furnace were inevitable. Now, it was replaced by a rectangular steel box less than 20 centimeters in thickness, which was 1 meter long and half a meter wide. This box was also the core of the whole system. Although in simple terms, it was like putting the magic cube and water in a container to achieve the fusion of combustion and evaporation. But whether it was the harsh sealing requirements or the pipeline shell that could withstand high pressure, it was not something that Border Town could achieve at the beginning. In other words, even if they had obtained the relic of the Radiation Clan at that time, they would not have been able to use it. One end of the steel box was inlaid with 3 magic ceremony cubes as the power source of the machine. The bottom of the box was padded with a layer of lead to block excess radiation. More than 10 heat pipes were neatly arranged on the top of the smooth shell, passing through the secondary water tank and the cooling condenser before returning to the bottom. The heating, energy supply, and cooling cycle was completely closed and did not exchange with the outside world. If the equipment was reliable enough, there was no need to add a new heat-conductive medium until it was scrapped. Of course, this size was not the limit of the new steam engine. Water was just the easiest and cheapest heat-conductive medium. If it was replaced with a more efficient medium, such as liquid alkali metal, the volume could be even smaller at the same power. However, the prototype was mainly to verify the feasibility of the plan, so Roland finally resisted the urge to complete it in one step. After all, if there was an overheating leakage accident, the entire laboratory would be blown up if the alkaline metal and water vapor were to mix together. The heat generated by the Rubik's Cube could be continuously transmitted through the pipes that extended from the heating box until the secondary water tank boiled. The following process was no different from that of an ordinary steam engine, using the technology that Neverwinter had long developed. The part that Celine admired the most was the condenser tubes that were evenly distributed on both sides of the body. In order to obtain a large enough surface area for heat dissipation, Each tube was twisted and turned. It would not be wrong to say that they were tentacles. If the existing steam engines were all big and bulky, then this prototype could be said to be small and exquisite, especially the silver-white core box and the brownish-red heat-conducting copper tubes that were bright enough to reflect one's face. In terms of color and brightness, it was much more dazzling than its predecessor. Even a layman who knew nothing about the industry would be able to tell the difference at a glance. In terms of craftsmanship alone, it was worthy of being called a work of art. Then shall we begin? Roland looked at the two of them. Anna nodded and put her hand on the operating lever. Let's do it together. Celine hesitated for a moment, but finally lowered the main tentacle and gently placed it on the hands of the king and queen. Rubik's Cube Steam Engine Prototype Test. 3, 2, 1, start. Following Roland's countdown, the control lever was pulled to the maximum limit with a click, and the linkage mechanism pressed down on the switches of the 3 Rubik's Cubes at the same time. The landmark new generation of power source began its first operation. However, there was only silence as if nothing had happened. Did it fail? Looking at the unresponsive machine, Celine asked hesitantly. No, let it burn for a while longer, Roland replied calmly. About 2 minutes later, the core box trembled slightly, and an indicator light on the pipe also emitted a soft yellow light. It was a pressure gauge made from the remains of the matchstick man, which indicated that the pressure in the pipe was changing. The heat transfer process was much slower. After waiting for another 5 minutes, the secondary water tank finally emitted steam, and the piston began to move slowly. As the temperature in the pipe gradually increased, the steam engine's flywheel spun faster and faster, and at the same time, the condensing system's water pump was activated. The latter's main function was to increase the speed of the fluid circulation in the pipe, and to pump the cooled heat-conductive medium back to the core box. Finally, the new machine completed a complete cycle and officially entered the operating state. Looks like the results are good. Anna let out a long sigh of relief and smiled. It's just a bit slow to start. That's a common problem with steam engines. Roland nodded. Heat transfer took time, and even with a more efficient heat-conductive medium, it was still not as fast as an internal combustion engine. In theory, at least 3 water tanks were needed to maintain the circulation, and no matter how small the new machine was, it was still much larger than an internal combustion engine. Also, the Rubik's Cube consumed a lot of uranium, which made the prototype almost useless. However, all industrial products had to be developed step by step. As long as Celine could solve the problem of durability, the new machine's obvious advantages could not be ignored. The mature technology allowed it to be put into production quickly, and its small size could be installed on most vehicles without increasing the fuel consumption. Even if the durability problem could not be solved for the time being, ships built with the new power source could save a lot of space for storing fuel, and thus could carry more goods or weapons. Half an hour later, the steam engine reached its limit. The whole machine was trembling, and the hissing sound of the exhaust turned into a sharp whistle. Obviously, the power of the core box made up of 3 Rubik's Cubes was a bit too much for this steam engine. Roland pulled the lever back to the first gear, which was equivalent to turning off 2 Rubik's Cubes, and then the prototype stabilized again. After that, it was a long reliability test. This step would last about a week, and it was also the part where problems were most likely to be exposed. After all, the new machine was very simple, and it was not difficult to make it move. The difficult part was to keep it running steadily for a long time. Originally, standing in front of a clanging steam engine was an extremely boring thing, but for Roland, it became a way to relieve his stress. He sat in the yard with Anna, chatting with her while watching the prototype. It was as relaxed and peaceful as when they first met. Celine quietly left the laboratory, leaving only Roland and Anna in the yard. Anna leaned her head on his shoulder, and the noise of the machine seemed to be very far away. If it succeeds, we will be one step closer to the world you once lived in, right? Yes, it will be a lot shorter. You know, there is no similar technology in that world. Can you also make a 4-wheeled car that can be driven by one person? Yes, if you like. I can design a simple one for you to try. Great. Anna sounded a lot more excited. By the way, what are you going to name this machine? Does it have to have a name? Roland asked with a smile. Of course. She looked very serious. Well, black technology number 1 or Rubik's Cube power, which one do you choose? How is it black? Really, I choose the latter one. But how do we distinguish the different models with the name? Simple. One Rubik's Cube represents 1 cylinder, and the prototype will be called 3 cylinders Rubik's Cube power. What do you think? Something is strange. Don't worry about the details. Chapter 1184. The experiment lasted for several days. In addition to testing the power of the Rubik's Cube, which made Roland feel relaxed, another way to relieve stress was the dream world. With a group of witches who were curious about everything and would never stop exclaiming, no matter what they did, they could make people feel happy. The opening of the cafe was no exception. After 1.5 months of hard work, the Rose Cafe finally welcomed its opening day. To keep a low profile, he deliberately chose to cut the ribbon and set off the firecrackers after 10 o'clock. At this time, most of the shops were closed, students and office workers had left, and the uncles and aunties were haggling in the vegetable market. It was the quietest time in the apartment complex. The 2-story cafe was located next to the warehouse. The rent was 3,500 yuan per month. Although it did not sound expensive, it was quite high considering the per capita spending power of the residents in the apartment complex. However, Roland did not care whether the cafe could make a profit or not, so he did not haggle with the landlord too much. His only request was that the wall between the warehouse and the rented apartment be opened so that the materials could enter and exit easily. Of course, the wall would be filled back when the rent was cancelled. Seeing that Roland had paid a year's rent in one go, the landlord readily agreed. However, these excuses were just to fool people. Roland did not intend to become a businessman, and the tequila witches certainly had no interest in serving others. Therefore, the decoration of the cafe was purely for decoration. It was more like a small place for people to entertain themselves than a shop. If possible, he hoped that there would be no customers at all. To achieve this goal, he hung a sign at the door with the sky-high price of every drink, such as a latte for 260 yuan, and a caramel macchiato for 300 yuan. He did not know the difference between the different types of coffee. It was just the price of a famous shop multiplied by 10. A bottle of soy milk in the neighboring shop was only 5 yuan and 50 cents. He did not believe that anyone would really visit this unscrupulous shop. By the same logic, if someone came in to spend money even though it was obvious that he was being cheated, he would most likely be the person on the note. However, Roland was not sure whether the name Rose would count. Your Majesty, is this all right? Phyllis put down the ribbon in her hand. Well, once the ribbon is cut, the Rose Cafe is officially open for business. He nodded. Let's go celebrate with everyone. Pushing open the door and walking into the room, he saw a bar counter and a few small round tables. Candles and rose vases were placed on each table, and soft music was playing from the stereo. It looked quite real. But when the two of them went up to the second floor, the atmosphere became completely different. It was more like a small restaurant than a coffee shop. Roland bought a full set of kitchenware and a barbecue grill for the ancient witches who entered the dream world. Compared to the time when he could only take them to eat Kaifeng cuisine and Lanlan Road, now they could taste all kinds of fresh food without going out. Probably to make up for the regret of hundreds of years, and the advanced cuisine he brought back from the hotel last time had opened the door to a new world. The witches' enthusiasm for cooking was beyond imagination. It took them some time to learn how to use gas stoves, microwave ovens, and other modern cooking utensils at the beginning, but after that, they could already make all kinds of new dishes according to the recipes without Roland's guidance. Moreover, some of them were particularly talented. The dishes they made were quite similar to the dishes of star-rated chefs. Although they were not good at plate presentation and parquet, their knife skills and fire control were absolutely impeccable. Phyllis was one of them. Your Majesty, I've just learned how to cook braised eel. Would you like to try it? Here comes the freshly grilled tenderloin. Your Majesty, can you help me find some ways to cook cold dishes? The witches' greetings were endless. Obviously, for them, cooking was no less fun than watching a movie or going out to play. Unfortunately, they could not stay in the dream world forever. Looking at the lively scene on the second floor, Roland could not help but feel a little regretful. After learning about Elena's death, he had entered the dream world many times, hoping to see her again here. However, neither the warehouse nor the tube-shaped apartment had changed because of her death. This meant that they would have to say goodbye to this place sooner or later. Whether it was because of the war or his death as an ordinary person, all these experiences would become untouchable memories. Probably because of this, they would cherish every time they entered the dream world. Perhaps he should also increase the frequency of his sleep, even if it was not for the sake of reducing stress. As long as they could stay here a little longer, it would be worth it. Ding ding dang. Just then, a crisp sound of a wind chime came from the first floor. The room suddenly became quiet. "Your Majesty, we have guests," Phyllis reminded him. "No way. Did the person who made the appointment react so quickly? The cafe has just opened, and they already came to visit?" He winked at the others and said, "Act according to the plan." Then he walked downstairs with Phyllis. Among these ancient witches, only number 76, who had lurked in black money for a period of time, had experience in serving others. "There's no one at the counter. Is your purpose of opening this cafe really to provide a job for the villagers?" The newcomer crossed her arms in front of her chest and slightly frowned, staring at Roland suspiciously. For a moment, Roland felt the newcomer's eyes scrutinize his cheeks and collar twice. The guest was Garcia. Roland heaved a sigh of relief. Garcia had known about the opening of the cafe for a long time, and the star martialist had helped him successfully transfer the business to the previous tenant. He nodded to Phyllis and said, "2 cups of coffee." Then he gestured to Garcia and said, "Of course, it's always been my goal to help them leave the village." "Wait, I'm not going to drink. It's my treat. It's free." Garcia sat down and said, "Anyway, the price you put out is too high. It's hard to believe your real purpose of opening this cafe." "You're wrong." Roland pretended to be sincere and said, "The most important thing for them to do is to adapt to the big city from the countryside. Do you think they'll be able to work peacefully if there are a lot of customers? It's good enough that they won't be scared. It doesn't matter if I don't make money. The key is to give them a space to adapt to life in the big city. This is the purpose of the Rose Cafe." "Is that so?" she asked doubtfully. "Of course. Also, I'd like to thank you for the invitation last time. It was a great help." Roland took the opportunity to change the subject. "Have you solved the problem of identity?" "Not only that, I've arranged a school for them. It's the same school as Zero, but they're in the high school." He smiled and said, "The 3 of them have always wanted to thank you in person." "That's good." Garcia's expression softened a lot. "You don't have to thank me. After all, it's all because of your efforts. In order not to give my father and the media an excuse, I chose not to stand up." Roland shook his head and said, "It's enough for you to do this." They fell into silence for a while. "Here's the coffee. Please enjoy it." Phyllis's voice broke the silence. Garcia came to her senses and seemed to want to hide something. She lowered her head and picked up the cup. "By the way, I have something important to tell you. Is it related to the Martialist Association?" Roland was not surprised. After all, Garcia was not the kind of person who would drop by for no reason. She nodded and said, "Yes, there's a task assigned to you by the higher-ups. I don't think it's an exhibition match or something like that. I heard that the preliminaries of the new martial arts contest are about to begin." Chapter 1185. Joint. Annihilation? Roland felt that this word was incompatible with the rule of law. The corner of his mouth twitched and he said, "It sounds like a big deal." "It's not as complicated as you think." Garcia seemed to have read his mind. "There have been several missions like this before. It's just that the association has enough information about the fallen evils and decided to catch them all at once. Compared with hunting alone or being attacked by fallen evils, it's much safer to take the initiative and prepare in advance. Have you participated in it before?" Garcia paused for a moment and said, "I've only heard about it from my master. I wasn't qualified to participate in a joint annihilation mission before. This is the first time. She paused, looked down at the coffee cup in her hand and said, maybe you don't care about this, but I still have to make it clear. The moment you got the hunting license, your position was already above mine. The association asked me to inform you because you haven't been in the association for a long time, so there may be some mistakes in the handover. That's all. If you don't think it's appropriate, I'll go back and tell the association. No, that's fine. Roland hurriedly interrupted her. He had joined the Martialist Association to solve the mystery of the erosion and the force of nature. He had robbed fallen evils to make money and support his family. He had never thought about contributing to the association, let alone becoming a regional leader. Since you're the one who introduced me to the martialist profession, you should take responsibility, understand? Garcia was stunned. She raised her head and stared at him for a while before she burst into laughter. Responsible? You're such a strange person. It's obviously a shameless excuse to be lazy, but I always feel like I'm taking advantage of you. Although she said so, she looked a lot more relaxed. Good that you know. Roland shrugged and said, let's get back to business. Besides you and me, who else will participate in this mission? Who's our target? In order to avoid leakage, we usually only reveal this information after everyone has arrived. Garcia took a big gulp of coffee and said, but I heard that some new martialists are also on the list. It seemed that the internal structure of the association was not completely united. He nodded. Then what's the meeting time and place? Tomorrow night at 6 p.m., the location is in the southern suburbs. I will send the exact location to your phone. At that time you can go by yourself or you can take my car. I can do it alone, Roland quickly said. If he were to ride with her, how would he be able to take a witch with him? Garcia curled her lips. Whatever you want. She waved at Phyllis and handed her a note. I'm Roland's neighbor. I live at 0827. If you encounter any trouble in this city, I mean anything against your will, you can call this number. I'll be happy to help. Phyllis blinked. Thank you. You're welcome. She patted him on the shoulder with a smile and waved to the door. See you tomorrow. With a series of crisp chimes, Garcia's figure disappeared behind the door. She's a good person. Phyllis sighed. Your Majesty, are you sure you want to go? Since the association has named me, I can't refuse. Just take it as payment for the hunting license. Roland said casually. Anyway, I'm not the only participant. As long as I pay a little attention, I should be fine. Besides, it's not bad to participate in this kind of activity once in a while. After all, beating people up was also a way to relieve stress. Moreover, he had witches to help him, so it would be difficult for anything to go wrong. Then I'll inform Lady Pasha to change a group of combat witches to help you, Phyllis bowed and said. After some enthusiastic registration and simple screening, the participants were quickly determined. They were still the first batch of witches to enter the dream world. Phyllis, Faldi, Ling, and Donnan. Their abilities were both concealment and tracking, so they were suitable for this backstage support job. The next afternoon, Roland and his team drove the van to the address on the GPS. On the map, the destination was a highway service area in the suburbs. Undoubtedly, this was an impromptu meeting point. It was convenient for them to arrive at the destination, and it would not attract attention when they changed vehicles. The Martialist Association was quite thoughtful. However, when he got off the ramp and entered the service area, he found that he had made a big mistake. There were dozens of dazzling luxury cars parked in the parking lot, and passers-by stopped to watch and point at them from time to time. What was even more exaggerated was that there were several groups of people gathered around, screaming excitedly one after another. Their posture was no different from chasing after a celebrity. At a glance, it was obvious that a celebrity martial artist had been recognized. Lualua, look over here. Can I take a picture with you? Are you here to shoot a commercial? Is that Mr. Yulong, the runner-up of the last competition? Wow, he smiled at me. He's so handsome. Hey, are you guys really here for a mission? Roland silently rolled his eyes. As soon as he parked the van, he saw Garcia walking toward him. Be careful. Got it. Donnan summoned lightless curtain and covered the 3 people in the back seat. Roland turned off the engine and got off the van. He greeted Garcia. "You're really fast. You're a hunter with a hunting license now. Why do you still drive this kind of crappy thing?" Garcia was puzzled. "I know you like to keep a low profile, but this has nothing to do with keeping a low profile. It's even shabby." "Really?" He spread out his hands. "I don't think there's a car more convenient than this. Whether it's to the supermarket or the market, it can carry a month's worth of food for several people. Other cars can't do that. Of course, the more important reason was that you never knew how many fighters could fit in a van." "Okay." Garcia seemed to accept his explanation helplessly. "If you don't mind other people's opinions." "Of course." Roland smiled indifferently. "Are those guys with shiny faces also martial artists participating in this mission?" "Yes, but don't say such rude words to anyone except me." Garcia glared at him. "According to the time of joining, they're all your seniors. What about according to their positions?" "That's even harder to say. In the eyes of insiders, you're now the representative of the old school." Garcia sighed. "If there's a chance to embarrass you in a mission, I'm sure they won't miss it." "I thought all martialists would be like you and focus on saving the world," Roland muttered. "By the way, you belong to the new school, right? Is it okay for you to be so close to me?" "Not everyone cares about the conflict between the new and the old," Garcia said grumpily. "Besides, didn't you ask me to be responsible for this mission?" "You're right." Roland couldn't help laughing. "Thank you. As your senior, let me briefly introduce them to you. But you've probably met some of them at my father's banquet, so I'll just tell you the 3 most important ones." Garcia raised her eyebrows at the center of the crowd. Luo Hua, a famous martialist. He's a skillful fighter and has many admirers. He ranked 10th in the last martial arts competition, the best result in this city. Although he started his career early, he's only 22 years old this year, which is quite an achievement. Mr. Yulong, age unknown, probably between 30 and 35. He comes from a martialist family and is one of the representatives of the new school. That's how he got his nickname. He's matured in all aspects, and some people say that he's as strong as persistence. He was the runner-up in the last martial arts competition and should be ready to win this time. If nothing goes wrong, he'll be the captain of this mission. Garcia paused and looked around for a while as if she was looking for a target. After a while, she pointed at a pavilion in the outer ring of the stadium. "And the last one is probably the one you need to pay attention to the most." Roland looked in the direction she was pointing. "Fei Yuhan, the rising star who rose in the shortest time. She's only awakened 5 years ago, but she's already made it to the finals of the martial arts competition twice. She's a genius that everyone in the association knows." Garcia's tone was a little complicated, with both admiration and envy. "I didn't expect her to participate in the mission. With her around, this team can be considered a celebrity team. So what should I pay attention to? Will she harm me?" Chapter 1186. "That's not what you said when you gave me the license," Roland thought to himself. "Why do I feel that all the people you introduced are from the new faction? The task of exterminating the fallen evils should belong to the old faction, shouldn't it? There are indeed more people from the old faction, but..." Garcia pointed at a few guys who looked like passers-by. "I don't have any detailed information about them, and their whereabouts are unknown. Except for their contacts, the other members of the association know very little about them. Even if I want to introduce them, I don't know where to start." Roland could not help but facepalm. If Garcia had not pointed them out, he would have thought that those middle-aged men were the chauffeurs or assistants of the star martialists. Not to mention their strength, the gap between their appearance and clothes was too big. Not participating in the martial arts contest did not mean that he would give up his image. At the thought of being labeled as the representative of the old faction by those glowing winners in life, he suddenly had an impulse to leave the group. Is it too late to sign up for the preliminaries of the martial arts contest? Just then, a black bus drove into the parking lot. "That's the bus from the Prism City," Garcia said. "Let's go." "Okay." Roland patted his right shoulder. This was a code word for the witches to follow him. As long as Faldy's bugs stayed close to him, it was impossible for the witches to lose their target. They boarded the bus and went straight to the last row. Sure enough, this place suits me the best. He spread his legs and lay back on the chair. Sitting here is like sitting on a throne. Not only can I look down on all living beings, but I can also see everything that's happening in the carriage. Just say it if you're a geek, Garcia said disdainfully. How can I have a good conversation with you like this? I didn't beg you to come with me. It's my first time on a mission. Of course, you have to watch me. While they were staring at each other, there was a sudden noise in the bus. Miss Fei Yuhan, I have an empty seat here. Yuhan, come and sit with me. As the girl, who was called a genius, walked into the bus, the crowd invited her to sit with them. It seems that even the star martialists are treated differently. Roland sighed. That's right. The two of them agreed on this point. But surprisingly, she didn't accept anyone's invitation. Instead, she walked towards the second half of the carriage. Is there anyone sitting here? Fei Yuhan pointed to the seat beside Roland and asked calmly. Garcia looked at her in surprise, and then looked at Roland, as if trying to figure out the relationship between them. On the other hand, Roland himself was also confused. He had no idea what the other party was thinking. Feeling the gazes of the other people in the carriage, he coughed uncomfortably and said, "No, thanks." Fei Yuhan nodded and sat down as though it was a given. First meeting, or should I say, second meeting. Hello, my name is Fei Yuhan. Please advise me on this mission. I'm Roland, and this is Miss Garcia. After the introductions, the atmosphere became silent. Perhaps because she knew that a martialist's hearing was particularly sharp, Garcia didn't speak again. Instead, she lowered her head and played with her phone. On the other hand, the genius girl sat ramrod straight, exuding an unapproachable aura. It was completely out of character for someone of her age. Only Roland, who was sandwiched between the two of them, felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles. He originally wanted to sit at the back to avoid attention, but now, everyone on the bus had noticed his existence. This awkward feeling of being the center of attention was only alleviated when the bus started moving. Just as he was about to discuss changing seats with Garcia, Fei Yuhan suddenly turned her head and said softly, "Your Majesty?" Thump. Garcia's phone fell to the ground. Roland was also stunned. He stared at her for a long time before saying, Good afternoon everyone. I'm C02, the liaison officer in charge of intelligence and support for this operation. You can just call me 02. However, before he could say anything, a man in a suit holding a microphone interrupted him. In the following period of time, I will introduce the mission's objective and plan in detail. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. As a result, Roland could only suppress his words and focus his attention on the liaison officer. According to the intelligence, the fallen evils have become more and more active recently, and have begun to act collectively, which means that the erosion is approaching. The association has received reliable information that some fallen evils are planning to hold a meeting in an abandoned factory in the southern suburbs. The specific purpose is unknown, but there is no doubt that it's not a good thing. Maybe they just want to make friends. Luo Hua's words caused a burst of laughter. If only that's the case. The man in the suit did not show any impatience. Unfortunately, the fallen evils are our biggest enemy, so it's better for them to all die. There's an underground road leading to the abandoned factory, but after the factory was closed, the road was blocked. 2 days ago, the association secretly opened this road, so that we can directly kill the fallen evils. In order not to alert the fallen evils, the operation is scheduled to start at 9 o'clock sharp. The relevant equipment will also be distributed when we get off the bus. In addition, the government army will cooperate with us from the ground to prevent the fallen evils from escaping. However, only those who have awakened the force of nature can harm these monsters. Therefore, we have to divide into 2 teams, one responsible for killing the fallen evils, and the other for encircling them. The list of teams has been placed under the table. If there are no problems, we will act according to this plan. Fei Yuhan looked through the list expressionlessly, but her mind was not on the paper at all. Instead, she was thinking about the expression on Roland's face when he heard the word, Your Majesty. If an ordinary person was exposed on the spot, the first thing he would feel would be embarrassment and anger, right? Although the latter emotion was rarely shown in front of her, unless they were prepared, she was confident that she would not miss the slightest change in expression and the cover-up that followed. However, what she saw on Roland's face was a very complicated expression. There was surprise, wariness, doubt, and even a hint of joy. For a moment, she noticed that Roland opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but he quickly suppressed it. Judging from the shape of his mouth, it should be the sound of AI. Such a reaction could not be explained with common sense. It was obviously Roland's first time meeting her. Regardless of whether he agreed or denied, he should not start with the word AI. Moreover, there was no awkwardness in these emotions, which meant that he was already used to this form of address. Fei Yuhan could not help but think of the words she had heard at the banquet. At that time, she had treated them as child's play, but now she was a little uncertain. The King of the Two Worlds? If it could be said that her curiosity at the beginning was only because she wanted to see who was stronger than Roland, now she was even more interested in Roland himself. She thought that it was the right decision to participate in this joint operation. Her master had once said that the Martialist Association had a much longer history than she had imagined, and the secrets it possessed were comparable to the stars in the sky. Some of them even involved the origin of the world, which only a few people knew. Was this also the reason why they made an exception and gave the hunting license to a newcomer? Considering the other party's wariness, Fei Yuhan forcibly suppressed the urge to continue asking. Before getting a clear answer, she did not want to become enemies with Roland. As long as she made the first move, there would be opportunities in the future. It was better to take things slowly. 2.5 hours later, the bus stopped at the end of the underground road. The martialists were divided into 2 teams according to the plan. They entered the factory through the emergency exit and headed to their respective positions according to the map. Roland, Fei Yuhan, and Garcia were undoubtedly the members of the frontal assault team, while Garcia was assigned to the finishing team. After leaving behind a warning, "Be careful, don't die," she quickly disappeared into the night with the rest. "The rest of you follow me." Just as Garcia had guessed, Sir Yulong, who was rumored to be close to Defender, was chosen as the leader of the main assault team. After giving everyone a look of encouragement, he took the lead and entered a ventilation duct. The whole operation was more rigorous than he had expected. Before getting off the bus, everyone received a pair of head-mounted 4-eye night vision goggles, a wristwatch that could display the map, a vest with a friend or foe identification device, and a headset for internal communication. This made Roland very envious. If the First Army had the same equipment, they would be able to completely reverse the disadvantageous situation of fighting at night. He silently counted and found that there were a total of 15 people in the assault team. Apart from the 3 people introduced by Garcia, the rest were all old-school martialists. From this, it could be seen that the higher-ups still recognized the ability of the actual combatants. However, if the new faction gained the upper hand in this battle, it would be hard to say what would happen in the future. Of course, Roland did not intend to get involved in the battle between the old and the new. In fact, he was also very curious about whether these stars who had stood out in the tournament could still win easily against the fallen evils, who would not rest until one of them died. Chapter 1187. "This is it," Mr. Yulong said in a low voice. Through the grill of the ventilation pipe, they cautiously observed their surroundings. They were probably in a large factory, with overhead cranes hanging on both sides. It was empty below, apart from a few abandoned old machine tools, and a conveyor belt covered in rust. There was nothing left. Obviously, the owner of the factory had removed all the equipment that was worth dismantling before sealing the place. However, the factory, which was supposed to be quiet, was now burning with several torches. Under glimmer vision, the flickering flames were almost greenish-white and even somewhat dazzling. At the center of the flames, they could see about 20 distorted figures. "Are they our targets?" Luo Hua asked. I can't be wrong, a traditional martialist answered. I can feel their undisguised energy fluctuations. Judging from their level of corruption, they're at the end of their life. The so-called end of their life was when they completely lost their consciousness and became puppets of the corruption. At this stage, the fallen evils were basically no different from beasts. They could no longer communicate with humans and only acted on instinct. They used to be martialists. Not necessarily. Although the association has records of many martialists falling, the corruption is more likely to happen to wild awakened ones. Although this is the first time I've seen a living fallen evil, a martialist who lacks initiative and self-discipline is useless no matter what they become. Luo Hua snorted. Pitiful fellows. They don't deserve the force of nature. Captain, let's get rid of these monsters now. Let's wait a little longer, Mr. Yulong said calmly. It seems that more fallen evils are gathering here. The more enemies we deal with, the less pressure we'll face. Don't you think it's strange? Since they're already at the end of their life, why are they here instead of hunting wild awakened ones? I have a feeling that things aren't that simple. If we can figure out their intentions, it might be more meaningful than killing them. Just as everyone was exchanging opinions about the situation, Roland's gaze repeatedly fell on the genius girl. Fei Yuhan's Your Majesty did not fade away. It could be said that in just a few seconds, his mood had fluctuated greatly. After years of experience on the throne of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, there were very few words that could make him feel so uneasy. When he first heard the familiar title, he almost thought that Elena's soul was attached to her body, and he almost called out her name. But in the end, he swallowed his words. If Fei Yuhan was really Elena's new body in the dream world, she would not have introduced herself in the first place, and would not have sat beside him without any scruples. This sudden change from joy to disappointment was not pleasant. At that time, Roland almost suffered an internal injury from holding it in. As for why Roland called out, Your Majesty, for no reason, it was not difficult to come up with a conclusion. Garcia once said that the 5 senses of a martialist were far better than that of an ordinary person, and some talented people were even better at it. Furthermore, she had attended the banquet of the Clover Group, and must have heard his conversation with the witches. The next question was, how much did Fei Yuhan know about his background? Judging from Fei Yuhan's probing behavior, Roland believed that she did not know much, at least nothing about the world outside the dream world. But this still alarmed him. No sentient being would want to be just an illusory existence. Once the secret of the dream world was revealed, it would inevitably bring about unpredictable consequences, and it was very likely that the consequences would be catastrophic. Garcia was right. Fei Yuhan was the one he needed to be wary of. Look, the new fallen evil seems to be a little different. Just then, a low voice came from the earpiece and interrupted Roland's thoughts. It seems to be commanding the other fallen evils. He took off the night vision goggles and looked toward the center of the factory. Under the guidance of a man in a suit, a group of fallen evils slowly walked in with 3 containers. A traitor who hasn't completely become a puppet. Mr. Yulong said doubtfully, what are they playing at? Several old-school martialists also frowned. Compared to the fallen evils who had completely turned into beasts, these half-human and half-human opponents were usually more difficult to deal with. They had lost the compassion of humanity, but retained their cunning and dangerous nature. Most of the awakened who could do this were already famous before they fell. Shoo. Fei Yuhan, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said, Quiet. There's something in the boxes. Everyone immediately held their breath. After a while she said in a low voice, There are people in the boxes. What? I heard soft sobbing and pleading, as if they were gagged. In other words, there are probably innocent people in the boxes? Mr. Yulong asked in surprise. I've never seen anything like this in the association's records. Although fallen evils aren't afraid of killing, they wouldn't specifically target ordinary people. While everyone was looking at each other, the enemy who seemed to be the leader suddenly shouted, It's time, children. The will of God is approaching, and God is longing for the sacrifice. Roar! The other fallen evils roared. Come, let the power return to the source, and let the oracle return to the earth. Roar! The destruction of this world will give us a new life. Let's leave everything to God. The sacrifice begins. The fallen evils immediately let out a deafening roar. Damn it, we have to move, the captain said through gritted teeth. The captain gnashed his teeth. Although he had never heard of the fallen evils systematically sacrificing ordinary people, let alone pleasing the gods like a cult, the fact was that they could not sit idly by and watch innocent civilians being slaughtered. In a sense, saving people was even more important than killing the fallen evils. The core spirit of the Martialist Association was to protect everyone, get as close to the boxes as possible and keep these monsters at bay. It's okay to let one or two escape. Trust the guys outside, they'll take care of them for us. Fei Yuhan nodded expressionlessly, and was the first to rush out of her hiding place. The others followed closely behind, and charged into the crowd of enemies like unsheathed blades of cold light. The factory that had been sealed for a long time suddenly boiled up. The fallen evils were caught unprepared. Their indestructible bodies broke under the bombardment of the force of nature, and once their cores were separated from their bodies, they would immediately become paralyzed. Roland, on the other hand, was at the end of the team. While covering the rear of his teammates, he carefully hid his ability. This was not the first time that he had fought with fallen evils, so he was far more experienced in fighting than the rest of the team. Unlike those martialists who had awakened the force of nature, he did not need to fight to the death with the enemies. As long as he touched the fallen evils, they would lose all their strength and then be completely at his mercy. In addition, he did not dare to touch the red cyclones, otherwise everyone would see the scene of the core spiraling into the sky. The bug on his shoulder was also trembling slightly, which meant that Phyllis and the others had already arrived. With a meat shield in front of him and support from the back, Roland was getting more and more proficient in the fight. Even though his skills seemed to be the simplest, in reality, the number of enemies he had defeated was second only to Fei Yuhan. Fortunately, the attention of the entire main battle team was focused on those boxes. Coupled with his deliberate disguise, no one noticed this unusual scene amidst the chaos. Everything went smoothly. After paying the price of a few injuries, the team successfully rushed to the boxes. More than half of the fallen evils were dead or injured. What? Looks like it was easier than I thought, Luohua said as he shook off the blood on his hand. He then grabbed the lock of the box and snapped it in half. Maybe the association should give me a hunting license. Hey, don't be afraid, the Martialist Association is here to save everyone. He froze on the spot before he finished speaking. The others also froze. There were dozens of people tied up in the box. They were fixed to the steel pipes like meat skewers. Their eyes and mouths were covered with strips of cloth, and they could only make stuttering sounds. Above their heads, there were the same number of core cyclones. Roland felt the hair on his back stand on end. He suddenly remembered what Garcia had said a few months ago. This thing is the source of the fallen evil's power, and the proof that they have been corrupted. Once they mutate, the force of nature can no longer be restored. If we don't collect it and seal it properly, it will sooner or later infect a new host. Even the simplest touch of an ordinary person will cause them to lose consciousness. You mean, it can be used by other people? That's why people collect it. It's obvious what these lunatics are up to. Aren't they afraid that the world will be destroyed? So, this is the moment they prepared for nearly half a year. Roland turned around and stared at the leader of the fallen evils. It wore a monocle, and its hair was combed straight back. It was wearing a crisp suit and a pair of white gloves on its hands. It looked like a rigid butler. However, at this moment, his face was full of madness. Although this sacrifice can be completed without your support, it's always better to give more gifts to the oracle, right? He stretched out his right hand and snapped his fingers. The core cyclones on the top of the box all fell. No. Luohua reached out to push away the people who were tied up in the box. However, with so many people around, it was almost impossible to prevent them from touching the core. Kill them now, a traditional martialist shouted. But they are all ordinary people, Luohua murmured. In a few seconds, the erosion was completed. Although they were all new fallen evils and their strength and skills were far inferior to those of the fallen martialists, they had an overwhelming advantage in numbers. Especially when they were face to face, the instinct to gnaw was enough to kill them. Chapter 1188. The situation suddenly changed. The sudden turn of events stunned Sir Yulong and Fei Yuhan. The traditional martialists, on the other hand, immediately turned around and worked together to stop the fallen evils. "Let's go. Find a way out," a middle-aged man said anxiously. "We can't be surrounded." The other two containers were also in an uproar. Sounds of collisions could be heard coming from inside, and the iron sheet was bulging. It was obvious that the lock could not hold them for long. If there were dozens of fallen evils in these two containers, they would not be able to escape, let alone kill them. The most important thing now was to avoid being attacked from the front and the back. Fei Yuhan reacted quickly. She turned around and dashed toward the factory gate. As long as they could rush into an open area, they could split up and retreat. This was undoubtedly the best way to break out of the encirclement. Roland still chose to stay at the back, but compared to his relaxed attitude at the beginning, he was now fully focused on dealing with the new fallen evils that were pouncing on him like zombies. Even if the fallen evils could not fight as well as they should, they would still be injured if they were bitten. "This is Team 1. We're in danger. The number of fallen evils far exceeds our expectations. Please help," the captain shouted while fighting back. In just a few seconds, 2 more fallen evils had pounced on them. The white light protecting them flashed twice before they were torn apart by the fallen evils. Seeing the blood and flesh of his companions, Mr. Yulong slowed down. Even a layman like Roland noticed that his fists and feet were not as agile as before, and there was a gap in his switching between attack and defense. After knocking down several fallen evils, a scratch appeared on his body for the first time. Boom! The container gate finally could not bear the pressure, and was smashed open by the frenzied fallen evils. However, there were not as many fallen evils as he had expected. Roland raised his eyebrows slightly. There were a dozen dead fallen evils tied to the steel pipes. Although they had completed their transformation, they did not break free from the ropes binding them. The large holes in their bodies were still dripping with blood, as if they had been pierced by something the moment they were infected. Looking at the corpses that were lined up in a row, he could clearly see the extra holes on the walls. Well done, he couldn't help but praise in his heart. There was no doubt that it was Phyllis who did it. He could even imagine that Phyllis, under the cover of Dawnin, had quietly moved to the back of the box and inserted the blade claw into the box as soon as she realized something was wrong. What's going on?" The enemy leader said angrily. "You damn thieves, what have you done to my child?" The group of people naturally had no time to pay attention to it. Although they were just as confused as it was, this was not the time to care about it. Without the pressure of fighting 10 enemies at once, the possibility of carving out a path of survival was much higher. For a time, the morale of the team was reinvigorated. "Forget it." It stomped its feet. "My plan will not be hindered by such a small interlude. You will all die here." After saying that, it took out a box that looked like a remote control from its pocket and pressed the button on it. Following a few loud sounds, the 4 corners of the factory instantly exploded, and the entire ground cracked into several pieces, collapsing downwards. The burning torches were also scattered by the airflow, and the surrounding vision suddenly became pitch black. Damn it! Roland could not help cursing. This thing actually buried explosives under the floor? Although he had a strange power, he could not fly like lightning. "Your Majesty!" At this critical moment, a slender hand reached out and grabbed him. After swaying for a while, he felt himself being held tightly. After a series of bumps, he finally landed on a piece of flat ground. "Ahem. Ling?" he asked in a low voice as he fanned the choking dust in front of him. "It's me. Are you okay?" The latter immediately responded. "Fortunately, the explosion just now made the fire disappear, so I had a chance to catch you." As expected, after the torches were blown away, the dark-covered factory became Ling's domain. When she moved in the shadows, she could almost achieve the same effect as nightingales' mist walk. "I'm fine. Are the other witches okay? Don't worry. With Phyllis here, this level of collapse won't hurt Donnan. Faldy stayed outside the factory to monitor the situation. She didn't come in. That's good. Roland pulled down the night vision goggles on top of his head again and looked around. Your Majesty, this thing that looks like a multi-eyed demon is? Ling asked curiously. It's a low-light night vision goggles that allow ordinary people to see clearly at night, Roland explained. So even if you're in a pitch-black place, you have to be careful not to be seen by others. It's... Gurgle. Ling dived into the shadows, leaving only half of her head exposed. A few bubbles came out of her nose as if it were real water. With the help of the faint moonlight, Roland quickly identified the current situation. The collapse had scattered everyone. The scene was filled with scattered concrete slabs, so he could not locate his teammates for a while. However, considering that martialists could use the force of nature to resist conventional injuries, this level of collapse would not kill them. The enemy should also know this. Since they had set up such a trap, they definitely did not just want to trap them here. As long as they could buy some time, the backup of the second team would arrive, and then the sacrifice plan of the leader of the fallen evils would be ruined. The most suspicious point was the pit. When C02 explained the route, he did not mention that there was a basement under the assembly site. Based on the map, the factory should have been built on flat ground. Judging from the different depths of the mud walls, this was obviously not part of the design plan. In other words, the enemy had deliberately dug out the underground of the factory and installed explosives that could collapse the floor. Why? Roland noticed that the sides of the pit were flat, but the center of the pit suddenly sank, like a huge whirlpool. Most of the fallen evil's corpses slid into the center of the whirlpool and piled up. Is this also part of the sacrifice ceremony? Roland's doubt did not last long. The leader of the fallen evils appeared in his sight again. Under the command of the butler, the surviving fallen evils did not search for the hiding place of the martialists. Instead, they jumped into the center of the pit one by one with the core cyclones and the corpses of their comrades that had not fallen into the pit. Not only that, they also did not let go of the broken corpses of the martialists. In the blink of an eye, the pit, which was not very big, seemed to be filled up. Roland's heart skipped a beat. The warm current in his body suddenly became active as if it was summoned by something. God, please accept my last offering. The butler spread his hands and fell into the pit. All the cores burst into a dazzling light almost at the same time. Roland pulled off the night vision goggles and stared at the center of the pit dumbfoundedly. He saw the scarlet core cyclone slowly rising, gradually condensing into a ball, and then spreading out in all directions, forming an irregular erosion. Then, something came out of the erosion and quickly merged into a whole body. It looked like a human with a head and hands, but it was just an outline. Inside the outline, there was nothing but darkness. Countless stars swirled in it, like the deep universe. As the humanoid shadow appeared, scarlet blood flowed from its body and quickly spread to the whole pit, turning the dark underground into a distorted space of red and black. The bug on Faldy's shoulder also began to make noises, indicating that Faldy had sensed danger. This was not the first time that Roland had seen such a scene. When he was robbing fallen evils, he had encountered a similar pure magic creature. However, this one was much larger than the last one. Just its erect upper body alone was as tall as a 2- or 3-story building. It turned out that this was the enemy's real purpose. The so-called sacrifice was not just a gimmick, but an attempt to artificially create erosion so that monsters that did not belong to the dream world would come. But he did not understand. If a large number of infected core cyclones could achieve erosion, why did they wait until now and lure the Martialist Association to intervene? However, the enemy soon gave him an answer. A dozen black tentacles suddenly sprang out of the scarlet blood-soaked ground, grabbed a martialist hiding under a concrete slab, and brought him to the magic creature. Monster. The martialist gathered all his strength and tried to break the tentacles, but all his struggles were in vain. You stole things that don't belong to you and tried to keep them. Now it's time to return them to their owners. The magic creature grabbed the martialist and threw him into the erosion. I will correct this mistake and return order to the right track. Accept your fate and return to the origin. Chapter 1189. The martialists were trapped in a hopeless situation. The infected ground seemed to have become the enemy's domain. No matter where they hid, they would be easily discovered. If they wanted to escape, they would have to face the nearly 10-meter-tall wall and the strange black tentacles. Once they were caught, it would be difficult to escape with their own strength. And if they were to fight to the death, anyone could feel the powerful pressure emitted by the enemy. Not everyone would dare to step forward and face the challenge of death when faced with an opponent with such a huge disparity in strength. The only one who chose this path was Fei Yuhan. You guys go first. Fei Yuhan's clear voice came from the earpiece. A white figure rushed out from the darkness and rushed toward the magic creature, while facing the surrounding tentacles. The light emitted from her body was clearly visible. That was the manifestation of the force of nature. Before this, she could only wrap it around her arms. The writhing tentacles pounced at her like venomous snakes, but Fei Yuhan dodged left and right with her feet. She managed to brush past the tentacles a few times, and only when she could no longer evade would she open her fist into a palm and slice off the tentacles. White light gathered in front of her fingers to form a sharp cone, like a hidden blade that could be extended and retracted at will. Upon seeing this, the other martialists escaped from their hiding places and ran toward the wall closest to them. Mr. Yulong was the first to charge. What a joke. Do you think you can escape from my domain like this? The magic creature raised its long arm and swatted at the captain who was running at the front. The seemingly unreachable arm suddenly expanded several times, becoming long and thick in the blink of an eye. At the last moment, Mr. Yulong realized that the situation was not in his favor and turned around to block the attack. At the same time, a dazzling light erupted from his hand. But after 2 flashes, he was smashed into the ground along with the giant arm. After a loud bang, even the bottom of the pit was pressed into a deep gully by this blow, and the concrete fragments lying across the path were turned into a layer of fine powder. When the opponent raised its arm again, there was only a flat pile of flesh left in the ravine. The magic creature swept up the mangled body along with the mud and stuffed it into the crack under its body. In an instant, the erosion seemed to have expanded. Roland realized that it was using the core cyclone of the martialists to widen the path of erosion. He did not know why, but there was an inexplicable displeasure in his heart. It was as if someone had taken over his things. Those cyclones should have belonged to this world, belonged to him. He couldn't tolerate this fellow's impudence anymore. Your Majesty, what should we do next? Phyllis and Donnan appeared behind him. The pit is about to be filled with tentacles. Of course it's to get rid of them before reinforcements arrive. But this process must not be seen by anyone. Roland patted Ling's head. Go knock out those that are not held back by the tentacles. Be quick, and give me a signal when you're done. That's easy. I'm going now. Gurgle. Ling replied and disappeared into the shadows. After that, it's a frontal breakthrough. He looked at the enemy's body that was nearly 10 meters tall. Although he had experience fighting similar opponents, and he knew that as long as he pulled out the astrolabe in the center of the mana body, he would be able to destroy the enemy, it was a new problem to approach that position. After thinking for a moment, Roland pulled Phyllis over and whispered in her ear. Your Majesty, how can we? Phyllis said in surprise. If I say it's possible, then it's possible. The most important thing now is to solve the problem, he interrupted her firmly. This is an order. Yes. Phyllis hesitated for a moment, but still agreed. I understand. Then there's only one troublesome fellow left. Roland frowned and looked at Fei Yuhan. While speaking, she had been sent flying twice by the enemy. Blood seeped out of the corners of her mouth and body, but she still stubbornly climbed up from the ground and attacked the behemoth that was several times her size. Although she was injured and her movements were not as agile as before, her imposing manner did not weaken. She did not look like a trapped beast in a desperate situation, but a stubborn rock exposed in a torrent. However, the number of tentacles intercepting her increased, and it was already extremely dangerous for her to deal with the attacks from all directions. Coupled with the enemy's ever-changing hands, It was almost impossible for her to get close to the enemy. If not for the magical creature focusing most of its attention on killing the escaping martialists, she might not have lasted until now. As she was in the center of the scarlet blood, Ling could not sneak in quietly, so she could only hope that Fei Yuhan collapsed on her own. "Your Majesty, I knocked everyone unconscious." Ling's voice suddenly sounded in the earpiece. "Well done." "Not a chance." Roland only realized halfway through his sentence that the earpiece was a channel that could be used by the entire squad. On the other side, Fei Yuhan was obviously stunned and staggered. It was this opening that caused her to be sent flying for the third time. The white light covering her body completely dissipated, and it was obvious that she had lost consciousness. Now, Roland braced himself and shouted. Even though there was a small flaw in the plan, he finally found an opportunity. "Sorry for my rudeness." Phyllis opened the magic claws on her back, grabbed his ankle, and spun him on the spot. Roland suddenly felt the world spinning, and the contents of his stomach almost surged up to his throat. When the rotation reached its peak, Phyllis suddenly released her claws. Under the inertia, Roland was like an arrow released from a bow, flying straight towards the magical creature. The moment Roland left the cover of the lightless curtain, the enemy also noticed the unknown object coming at him. It dropped the martial artists who were knocked unconscious and reached out to slap Roland, as if it was trying to kill a fly. However, the collision did not happen as expected. Roland easily pierced through the pitch-black arm and crashed into its chest. Its tall and burly body was no longer indestructible, and it seemed to have returned to its original form, a group of imaginary illusions. The magical creature roared in horror. After a moment, it seemed to suddenly understand. "It's you didn't listen to my advice after all." Roland grasped the rotating astrolabe on its chest with both hands and pulled it hard. The crimson galaxy gradually turned blue and white, and the power in his body was also cheering as if it was expecting something. "Was that your brother last time? I'm sorry, it's a bit slurred, and I didn't hear its advice at all." "We are one." The magical creature's voice also began to distort. "Stop your foolishness. This is the last warning. Otherwise, everything will be irreversible. Everything will return to nothingness, and the accumulation of thousands of years will be destroyed. Such a crime is not something you can bear." The moment the astrolabe was pulled out, the creature's voice stopped abruptly. A dazzling white light soared into the sky and almost illuminated the entire pit. An indescribable sense of satisfaction filled Roland's body, as if his plea had been answered. The heartbeat of the earth seemed to have become much clearer. For a moment, he felt that he had become one with the world. In the chaotic realm of mind, the King of Nightmares suddenly opened its eyes. Just a moment ago, it felt a trace of an unprecedented rhythm, as if a song was accidentally played in the chaotic waves, which formed a sharp contrast with the chaos around it. Previously, when it was tracking the connection of the legacy shard, it had experienced a similar experience, but it had failed several times. After all, the lower consciousness was extremely complex, and a little carelessness would cause it to lose its way. But this time, it was much more vivid and clear. This proved that the location that triggered the rhythm was nearby. The corners of Valkyrie's lips curled up slightly. Chapter 1190. After everything was over, Team 2 finally arrived. Roland smeared mud on his face, tore a few holes in his clothes, and pretended to be as weak as the others as he lay on the ground, waiting for the Martialist Association's rescue. Although Ling's exuberant curiosity caused her to commit a grave mistake, she only imitated the button to speak, step and did not change the channel to the entire team's communication mode. Therefore, Fei Yuhan was the only one who heard the declaration of knocking the monster unconscious. Not to mention the fact that she was still unconscious. Even if she woke up, Roland could firmly deny it, and attribute the absurd ravings to a hallucination caused by his severe injuries. As for why the monster disappeared without a trace, it was naturally a question that he could not answer since he had already fainted. Although this was equivalent to giving the genius girl all the credit for forcing the enemy to retreat, in Roland's eyes, this was exactly what he wanted. What happened next was just as he expected. Without witnessing the battle with his own eyes, his vague description did not attract the attention of the liaison officer. The association's attention was completely focused on the new erosion. Even the death of only 6 of the 12 people in the main battle team, including 2-star martialists, was nothing compared to the shocking news of a man-made erosion. The only thing that surprised Roland was that Garcia was the first one to jump into the pit when the second team arrived at the scene. Seeing Garcia anxiously shouting his name while searching for him at the bottom of the pit, as well as her undisguised joy after finding him, Roland could not help but feel a surge of warmth in his heart. Of course, this feeling did not last long. Garcia quickly put on a cold expression and muttered in a low voice, "What? You're not dead yet?" She then dragged him into the ambulance. At this point, the joint annihilation mission had finally come to an end. After returning to the apartment, Phyllis and the others expressed their concern about the warning from the magic creature. After all, the enemy's last words were somewhat shocking and did not seem to be nonsense. The fact that they could discover Roland's abnormality in the first place was a proof in itself. If it was a year ago, Roland would have indeed considered the warning of the magic creature. There was a period of time when he was vigilant and resistant to this dream world, which was gradually becoming more and more complicated and unfamiliar. It was as if something that was originally born from his will was gradually breaking away from his control. But now he had already made a decision. The dream world was not only a tool for him to make up for his lack of knowledge, but also a complete home for the gods' punishment witches. He might not be able to make this world exist forever, but before that day came, he hoped that he could accumulate more pleasant memories for the tequila survivors who had lost most of their senses. Another reason was that he trusted his own feelings. Now that he thought about it, the subtle changes in the dream world might have started from the release of the first core cyclone. Although Roland had not figured out the relationship between the two, he felt a sudden sense of comfort when he defeated the magic creature and took away its astrolabe. He had a vague hunch that as long as he continued like this, he would find the answer one day. In addition, the end of the mission did not mean the end of the incident. It was not hard to imagine that the news of using the infected core to create the erosion would cause a sensation in the association. When the other martialists woke up, the association would definitely slowly restore the whole process of this conspiracy from different angles, and the corresponding investigation would also last for a long time. He would also be affected to a certain extent, and he might even be suspected by the new faction, and even be hostile to him. But in any case, that was a matter for the future. 3 days later, the detective group finally returned to Neverwinter. Summer had not only retraced the whole process of the final battle of the tequila, but also recorded several important scenes with the sigil of recording. After receiving the news, Roland immediately summoned the senior officials who participated in the battle to the main hall of the third border city, and watched the whole battle in person. When Ashes used herself as a sword and triggered the divine will to perish together with Osruk, Roland felt a slightly trembling hand grab him. He opened his palm and gently held it until the end of the magic film. When his vision returned to normal, he noticed that Tilly's eyes were slightly red, but even so, she did not show any intention of escaping. Instead, she stood still and watched the entire rewind. All the missing pieces of the puzzle were filled in at this moment. It's the first time I've seen an I-demon merge with an ordinary demon. After a moment of silence, she let out a long sigh. But how did they do it? One of the biggest doubts about the ambush was how the demons could immediately rush to the sniping site after discovering the Special Action Group. Although Andrea had suggested the possibility of the I-demon, it did not match the giant and clumsy image of the demon. Finally, there was conclusive evidence. A week before the final battle, Osruk cut open the face of a mad demon guard and stuffed an eyeball sealed in a box into its wound. The eyeball seemed to wake up when it sensed the blood. Its roots pierced into the mad demon's body one by one, causing the latter to let out an indescribable scream. The process lasted for nearly a week until the mad demon's head was completely occupied by the eyeball. The eyeball that the mad demon had embedded was not a stone of throwing, but an extremely rare stone of flight. Theoretically, such a stone could not be provided to a low-level demon. This also meant that Osruk had begun to prepare the necessary conditions and manpower for the trap at least half a year ago. The moment the transformed mad demon flew out of Tequila, Sylvie's position was exposed. In order to buy time for the guards to surround the mad demon, it deliberately flew to the First Army's position, and then turned back, pretending to have abandoned the defense and fled. Considering that the time difference could be controlled at will, no matter where the Special Action Group was, they would be attacked by a large group of demons after shooting. Unless they gave up this opportunity, stopped monitoring the transformed mad demon halfway and quickly retreated to the west, they would not be able to escape from the enemy's encirclement. Rather than calling it a fusion, I think it's more like a kind of control, like a carrier. Agatha pondered. The one acting as Osruk's substitute wasn't the original mad demon, but the miniature eye demon on its head. Why do you say so? Roland asked. Chapter 1191. Technology. Roland frowned. He had seen in the memories of the demons how these aliens achieved advancement. They fused with more powerful magic stones to define their talents and abilities. If they succeeded, they would live. If they failed, they would die. In essence, there was not much difference between the abilities of the witches. They were all up to fate, and it was even crueler. But technology was different. As long as they could master its rules, they could quickly expand and develop according to their needs. This was not a good sign for human beings. Are you sure? Anna, who was the closest to Roland, was also aware of this. We still need to do further research on the remains, but... She looked at Celine. Celine nodded her main tentacles and led them to a black boulder covered with cracks. This is a part of the giant skeleton. Based on the results of the current dissection, it is likely to be a living thing. Well, it's not surprising that it's a living thing, Roland said while stroking his chin. After all, an officer had mentioned in the post-battle report that when the enemy's giant skeleton was hit by a cannonball, it let out a deafening howl. This thing is equivalent to the armor of a deformed demon. No, Your Majesty, Celine said in a strange tone. I mean, this stone is alive. What? Everyone was slightly stunned, and then took a step back in unison. Wait, you mean it's alive? Is the stone also a kind of demon? I don't quite understand. Can you explain it in more detail? For a moment, the hall was filled with questions. Simply put, it has an independent system, and can perform simple actions on its own. Celine rolled up a hammer and hit the broken part of the stone. With a dang sound, the stone trembled slightly. Through the gap, Roland could vaguely see something similar to a meridian wriggling inside. The trembling lasted for half a minute before it stopped. Obviously, it was not caused by the hammer. From the scene, we know that there is a huge tissue hanging under the giant skeleton's abdomen. We have always thought that it is the deformed demon's body, but the results of the dissection proved that the two are not the same thing. Agatha continued. After discovering this, Celine and I still couldn't understand it. Since the skeleton could move by itself, why did the deformed demon in its abdomen exist? It wasn't until I saw the magic slayer transforming his subordinates that I suddenly realized that they were very similar. Anna was the first to react. Carrier? That's right, Celine said approvingly. Whether it's the original carrier or the devouring worm, they both have a distinct characteristic. That is, when there is no controller, they are still alive. Your Majesty, do you remember what Caberdabi said? Did you also get a piece of inheritance and upgrade your civilization? She turned to Roland and said, Your Majesty, do you remember what Caberdabi said? There's another sentence after that. Roland nodded. When he heard the word upgrade for the first time, he almost blurted out, I'm Tatarin. So it left a deep impression on him. Those weapons were also created based on the contents of the fragments? That's what it means, Tilly said thoughtfully. Now it seems that Caberdabi thought so because they had similar experiences and obtained the method of making carriers from the fragments. In other words, both the spider demon and the giant skeleton are actually the combination of two demons, one as the carrier and the other as the controller? That's very likely. After all, the two have too many similarities. For example, the carriers have extraordinary vitality, can survive for a long time in dormancy, and won't die easily even if they are severely injured. It's possible to attribute the legacy shard to the underground civilization, but don't the latter use soul instruments to control the carriers? The demon's method seems to be a little different. Maybe they didn't obtain the complete method of making the magic core, so they couldn't transform their bodies like the underground civilization, Agatha said. Or maybe this method is more suitable for them. It's just like how the Union invented the God's Punishment Army transformation method when they didn't have enough carriers. In a sense, Scourge is a carrier. Wait, this doesn't sound right, Nightingale said with a puzzled look. Although I don't quite understand your reasoning, there is one thing I can be sure of. That is, humans have never received any inheritance. The weapons used by the First Army were all His Majesty's ideas, and the transformation of the God's Punishment Army was the result of the Union's research. In the end, we still mastered the method of using the magic core, and took over the relics of the underground civilization, didn't we? In fact, this is the key to the problem, Agatha said seriously. I guess the relics of the gods are not the only way to obtain the legacy. That's why I call it technology instead of ability. Roland suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. An indescribable feeling welled up in his heart. You mean learning? Yes. The Ice Witch exhaled. Through teaching and learning, even without devouring the relics of the gods, or the legacy shard, as Caberdabi said, we can still obtain everything the civilization has accumulated. I think this is the essence of the legacy. There was a brief silence in the hall. After a while, Celine's words resounded in everyone's mind again. Considering that the demons have created so many new weapons of war in 400 years, maybe the function of the relics of the gods is to greatly shorten the long learning process, or even complete it in an instant. The evolution of the civilization is what they call upgrading. Roland finally understood what was bothering him at this moment. Perhaps Caberdabi was right. Human beings did obtain the legacy, but it was not by relying on the relics of a certain civilization. Instead, it was the oldest form of oral transmission. As a time traveler, Roland had invisibly connected the two worlds. If that's the case, doesn't that mean that the relic of the gods is recording everything about us at all times? Wendy looked worriedly at the secret room at the side of the hall. That was where the relic was kept. Unless we can also get a fragment, no one will know the answer. Agatha shook her head. But if the demons really have the carrier technology, we're likely to encounter more challenges that we've never seen before. She looked at Roland apologetically and said, I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I'm afraid that the Union's hundreds of years of war experience won't be able to help you. It doesn't matter. For the demons, the third battle of Divine will be a brand new experience. Roland comforted her. Although the future was uncertain, he had to maintain his confidence in front of everyone. In addition, if the upgrade is only limited to the technology, it means that we can also learn what we need from the demons and even the civilizations that have lost the legacy shard, right? Chapter 1192. In the following days of meetings, the General Staff reviewed and summarized the entire process of Operation Torch, based on Summer's backtracking and the results of the search of the Tequila ruins. Almost every day, reports would be sent to Roland's desk. The pile of reports was almost half the height of a person. More and more details became clear. For example, the giant god stone that appeared in the Battle of the Northbound Slope and the siege of the Tequila City came from the God's Stone mine in the ruins. At the bottom of the mine, the detective group found the corresponding missing parts of the ore clusters. 2 medium-sized God's Stone pillars were cut in half, and the cut surface was very smooth, as if they had been cut by a sharp weapon. Although the backtracking ability could not be used near the God's Stone, looking at the overall situation, it was very likely to be related to the giant skeleton. In fact, the latter was not only a transportation tool, but also a small obelisk that could regenerate the red mist. The corroded land around the ruins was proof. However, compared to the obelisk that covered hundreds of kilometers, its coverage was only 1 to 200 meters, and it could not be created out of thin air. it still needed the supply of the red mist to maintain. As a sentinel that could move freely, its strategic significance was self-evident. The General Staff concluded that, compared to the spider demons, this giant carrier was probably a rare species among the demons. Otherwise, it could completely replace the role of the outpost and occupy the entire fertile plains before the humans could react. In addition, most of the tunnels behind the Tequila ruins were dug by the spider demons. Although their digging ability was far inferior to the devouring worms, they were still much better than the mad demons. These tunnels all started from the God Stone mine, and the depth of the tunnel obviously considered the threshold of observational abilities. Coupled with the ample preparation time, it was not easy to discover them. As Celine and Agatha were inclined to view the giant skeleton and the spider demons as the same type of demon, Roland also gave them a new name, Monstrous Beast, to distinguish the giant skeleton from other demons. With a specific prefix, they could quickly name the demons of the same type that had not yet been discovered. Currently, these two carriers were named the Fortress-type Monstrous Beast and the Spider-type Monstrous Beast. The latter was further divided into the Stone Needle Thrower type 1 and the Human Thrower type 2. Not only was the accurate name beneficial for battle deduction and command delivery, it was also more convenient for post-battle statistics and records. Other than the detailed analysis of the battle, Roland's other focus was the shortcomings and improvements that the General Staff listed based on the results. Among them, Edith's personal report, which was also ranked first among the many problems, was still the shortcoming of the investigation ability. Putting the sky aside, in the history of human warfare, tunnel warfare was limited by the ratio of excavation tools and cost. It had always been a unique tactic, and could not be used as a conventional tactic. But this rule was no longer applicable in front of the devouring worms and spider-like monstrous beasts. As long as enough carriers were gathered, the enemy could even excavate an underground passageway for an army to pass through in a short period of time. Thus, the ground beneath their feet had become a dangerous area that they had to guard against. Without a doubt, not only would Sylvie not be able to take care of it alone, it would also not be worth it. When the Eye of Magic saw through obstacles, the consumption would be greatly increased. Under the condition that the total amount of magic power was fixed, monitoring a target 10 kilometers away from the surface for an entire day would only require a shallow layer 3 to 4 meters deep, the size of 1 or 2 football fields. Moreover, apart from extraordinaires, all witches' abilities had a threshold. When a certain condition was exceeded, the consumption of magic power would increase exponentially. Under such circumstances, any non-emergency action would be a waste of magic power. The First Army had to take on this task themselves. Roland vaguely remembered that in history, both sides had used underground monitoring to guard against each other's tunneling and surprise attacks. The principle was similar to a stethoscope, with the characteristic of sound transmission in solid objects being less attenuated than through air. It could capture the movements of the opponent's tunneling more clearly. But this method was limited to the tunnels being excavated near the camp. For traps like the Tequila that had been set up long ago, listening alone could not solve all the problems. After much consideration, Roland finally came up with a feasible method: drilling. This was a detection method widely used in the civil engineering industry. As one of the double dogs of science and technology, he had often heard of it from his roommates in the Faculty of Civil Engineering. To put it simply, it was to smash a steel bar vertically into the ground and judge the hardness of the soil according to the depth of the hammer. The test points were generally distributed in plum blossom piles a few meters apart. As long as a probe was equipped, a large area of inspection could be completed with a few people. When the number of steel bar sinking suddenly increased, there was a high possibility that there was a hole below. Combining the two methods of listening and probing, it was basically possible to detect threats from underground without the help of the witch's abilities. As for the reconnaissance of the enemy in the air, the only way to get rid of the dependence on Lightning and Maggie was to develop the Air Force. As for when this part could be made up, it was up to Tilly. In addition, there were many conclusions in the report, such as relying too much on the position and lacking the ability to provide quick support. While Roland was amazed by the rapid improvement of the General Staff, He also felt somewhat helpless. He was aware of these problems, but due to the limited population of Neverwinter, it was difficult for him to make up for these shortcomings in a short time. Finally, among the many reports, one point caught his attention. It was a report from a logistician at the grassroots level of the army. According to the report, the performance of the Mark I type machine gun was not very stable during the high-intensity battle. After the decisive battle, many soldiers in the machine gun squad complained that they spent more time changing the barrel than firing the gun, which was a great burden to the logisticians. If possible, he hoped that the engineering department could improve it. This was also the first time that Roland had directly received the feedback from the frontline soldiers after the establishment of the feedback system. As the users of the weapons themselves, they were the ones who knew the pros and cons of the weapons best. In fact, when he was attacked at Tower Station Number 1, he had noticed that there was an abnormal increase in the number of discarded gun barrels. However, since these parts could be recast, he did not pay much attention to it. Now that he thought about it, it must be because of the lack of experience of the shooters and the sudden increase in the pressure of the enemies. During the night, the soldiers were more nervous. Moreover, it was difficult to confirm the results of the battle, so they would not let go of the trigger. The air-cooled gun barrel was not as durable as the water-cooled gun barrel. It could handle the intensity of the previous battle, but now that the shooting time was prolonged, the heat dissipation could not keep up. This also alerted Roland. In the beginning, he had used the air-cooled gun barrel purely because he wanted to use it for multiple purposes. If he had designed it according to Maxim's idea, it would not be universal. However, the actual effect was not as ideal as he had expected. Although the production of tracer bullets and the increase in the experience of fighting at night could alleviate this situation, the enemy had only sent a small number of soldiers to the Western Front. If the main force of the battle really came to a point where the demons were everywhere, the misfiring of the heavy machine guns would be fatal. Fortunately, this report made him realize his mistake. Chapter 1193. In addition to the summary of the final battle, the General Staff also made a preliminary plan for the third battle of Divine Will. Although the enemy's intention was still unclear, one thing was certain. Tequila should not give up no matter which direction the demons attacked from. As a nail on the fertile plains, it could not only prevent the demons from expanding, but also serve as a cornerstone for Neverwinter to advance into a wider territory. As long as the tequila was in the hands of the humans, the northwest of Grey Castle would not be in danger of being suddenly attacked by the Red Mist. Therefore, it was necessary to restore the Holy City, which had been abandoned for hundreds of years, into a fortress. If the main force of the demons still attacked from the fertile plains, the First Army would have to strengthen the defense of the railway line to prevent the demons from cutting off the supply line and actively attack the Red Mist outposts. The whole strategy was basically the same as Operation Torch. Although the pressure was great, they had experienced it before. As long as they could withstand it, the victory of the humans was just around the corner. To put it simply, it was similar to a set of emoticons that Roland often saw in his previous life. Don't be afraid, just do it. If you win, ahem ahem ahem, ahem. If you lose, go to the sea to fish. In short, just do your best. The problem was the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter in the northeast. If the demons really attacked the hinterland of the human kingdoms from the ridge of the continent, the battle would be extremely troublesome. The Kingdom of Wolfheart had many hills, and the Kingdom of Everwinter lacked rivers. Moreover, there was also the Kingdom of Dawn and 2 mountain ranges between them. It was impossible to lay the railway all the way to the north of the continent in a short period of time. The construction of tunnels and bridges to cross the natural barriers was already difficult to solve. At the same time, the First Army could not rely on the local nobles to provide logistical support. After the implementation of the population plan, the nobles would definitely become enemies with Grey Castle. At that time, it would not be surprising if the nobles would stab them in the back. Therefore, this part of the work could only be done by the army itself. In this case, the only reliable way of transportation was by sea. The problem was that the port cities were all concentrated on the east coast of the continent, which was not good for the defense line. Once the demons surrounded them, there would be no way to retreat. It would be fine if they could hold on, but if they failed, the losses would be considerable. In addition to fighting the demons, the First Army also had to protect and evacuate the people. Compared to the boundless and desolate fertile plains, there were too many uncertainties in fighting in another country. Because of this, the general staff did not even have a plan that involved the north. It only mentioned this possibility. In the previous meeting, Roland even noticed that Edith had dark circles under her eyes. Ever since she was deceived by Osrook's strategy, the Pearl of the Northern region seemed to be even more determined to win. Roland put down all the reports and sighed. For him, it would be better for the demons to continue attacking from the fertile plains. However, before Lightning and the Tequila detection team received any concrete information, this was not a matter that could be decided by personal preference. Rather than worrying about the enemy's choices, it was more effective to use his own methods to increase his chances of winning. At this thought, he stood up. "Your Majesty?" Nightingale asked with dried fish in her mouth. "Accompany me to the new research institute," Roland said slowly. "It's time to see how far the Radiance plan has progressed." In the North Slope Laboratory in Neverwinter, Lady Anna. As soon as Lucia White opened her mouth, she was interrupted by Anna. "I told you not to call me Lord." "Yes. I couldn't help calling you that when I thought you were the Queen." She stuck out her tongue in embarrassment and put down the metal block in her hand. "I've prepared all the materials you need. If there's nothing else, although I'm the Queen, you're also my partner." Anna walked up to her with a smile. "Are you going to the new laboratory?" Lucia nodded vigorously. "Yes, it's about time." "Then go. Be careful on the way." Anna walked her to the gate of the courtyard. "If you run out of magic power or have some free time, come and accompany me." "I will." Lucia waved her hand and ran down the mountain road. Her work schedule was the most varied in the Witch Union. She often had to go back and forth between the chemical laboratory, the mine furnace area, the backyard of the North Slope, and other places. Before the new laboratory was built, she basically did not have a fixed place. Among these places, the backyard of the North Slope was the one she spent the most time in. She fused high-quality alloys according to Anna's ideas and requirements, and then watched Anna cut the metal ingots into precise parts. This process always gave her an indescribable sense of satisfaction. Perhaps it was because she felt that the world was becoming more and more beautiful because of her power. After all, she had come to Neverwinter to cure her sister's demonic plague. She did not expect that she would not only find a place for her sister, but also live a life like home. To be honest, Lucia was a little uneasy at first, as if she owed everyone a lot. But now, she could also become one of the contributors and assist Princess Anna and the chief alchemist in building this increasingly prosperous city. Her uneasiness gradually turned into fulfillment and pride. Moreover, the more Lucia spent time with Anna, the more she felt respect for her. She had never thought that a witch could play such a big role and bring earth-shaking changes to the city by herself. Lucia admired Anna's knowledge, talent, and concentration when she devoted herself to work. If Nightingale was the person she trusted the most, then Princess Anna was the person she wanted to be the most. And now, she seemed to see such an opportunity. Since His Majesty built a brand new laboratory on the south bank of the Redwater River, she also had a fixed place of her own. According to His Majesty, this work was related to the fate of all human beings. If the experiment went well, everything she did might become the biggest trump card in the battle of divine will. Thinking of this, Lucia could not help but walk a little more briskly. After crossing the Redwater Bridge and continuing south along a spacious cement road for several hundred meters, a row of towering walls appeared in front of her. Different from the busy factories, this place was located between the industrial area and the farmland, and the roar of machines could hardly be heard. The trees on both sides of the road cast a cool shade on the ground. Although it was already autumn, the leaves above her head were still lush and green. Occasionally, a few bird chirps could be heard, which not only did not make it noisy, but also highlighted the tranquility and serenity of this place. Judging from the surrounding environment, this place looked more like a residential area than a laboratory or something like that. However, The heavily armed soldiers standing guard outside the gate proved that this was not an ordinary courtyard. When Lucia walked to the gate, the soldiers raised their hands to salute her, and then turned around to open the gate. And this was only the first checkpoint. The security inside was even tighter. Walls divided the courtyard into several areas. Except for a few people, the rest of the people had to verify their identity and be accompanied by guards. Lucia was naturally one of the former. She smiled and greeted the soldiers. After passing through several checkpoints, she finally arrived in front of a white brick house. The house looked similar to an ordinary residential building, and there were many creepers growing on the walls. The only difference was that there was a golden plaque hanging next to the door, on which a few words were engraved. Chapter 1194. Lucia did not understand what high-energy physics was, nor did she understand what she was doing had anything to do with physics. However, she noticed that every time His Majesty saw the plaque, he would stop and stare at it for a long time, as if it had a strange power. This made Lucia more active in her new work. Although what she was doing was not much different from what she was doing in the furnace area, every time she thought of His Majesty's expression, she felt that she might be doing something really great. After entering the inner yard, Azima, who was lying on a chair with her eyes closed and resting, raised her hand to greet her. "Hey, you're here." Good afternoon." Lucia hurriedly returned the greeting. "The sun is warm here, so I fell asleep for a while." Azima stretched herself. "Shall we start working?" "Yes. Sorry to trouble you." She waved her hand. "Don't mention it. I'm your assistant. If you need anything, just tell me. It's not the first time we've met, so there's no need to be so formal. Besides," Azima muttered in a low voice, but the warm autumn wind still carried her words into Lucia's ears. "I can get 2 golden dragons' monthly salary just by sitting here. What's there to complain about?" Lucia could not help but cover her mouth. To be honest, she was a little afraid of Azima at first. After all, she had heard from Vendi that the internal strife in Sleeping Island was caused by this tall, red-haired witch with sharp facial features. As the leader of a small group, Azima was naturally outstanding. Judging from Azima's behavior, she indeed had the demeanor of a big sister. Therefore, when His Majesty asked Azima to be her assistant, Lucia was quite perturbed and felt that she was not qualified to be the head of the new research institute. However, after a few months of contact with him, Lucia found that he was not as scary as she had imagined. Although he occasionally complained about Princess Tilly and even blamed His Majesty, he was very cooperative when it came to his work. He was also very sensitive to her salary. Lucia often heard nagging like, "Isn't it just to support myself? I will definitely prove it to you." And Nightingale, "Just wait and see." In short, he was not as indifferent as he seemed. In fact, he was a very interesting person. "Then thank you." Lucia opened the wardrobe and handed her a white protective suit. The first step was to completely isolate his body from the outside world. Not only did he have to touch her, but he also had to go through a special filter to breathe. This was something that His Majesty had repeatedly told him. The purified substance was extremely toxic. Even a grain of powder could kill a person. In order to prevent carelessness, the two of them had to check each other's clothes, especially the parts that they couldn't see. After putting on the protective suit, Azima gave her a thumbs up. Then the two of them walked into an open-air courtyard. Cyan stone bricks were placed neatly on the ground, covering more than half of the courtyard. Apart from their darker color, they looked no different from the bricks that had just been baked in the furnace area. However, as long as she held them in her hands, she could immediately feel the difference. Each stone was extraordinarily heavy, as if they were made of metal rather than stone. Lucia picked one up and covered it with her magic power. Due to being baked in the sun for a long time, the surface of the stone brick was slightly hot, but this did not affect her ability. Under her magic power, the brick turned into a mass of colorful compositions, some of which were very dazzling as if they were glowing. The color blocks that His Majesty needed only occupied a very small part of them, like ink spots that were accidentally spilled on a painting. Of course, compared with the pile of ores in the North Slope Mountain, This was already a great improvement. Under her command, the color blocks slowly moved and reassembled until they became 4 separate entities. The largest part was waste, which could be thrown into the dustbin. Every day, Tequila would send people to collect it, so she didn't need to deal with it. As for the remaining 3 parts, each was smaller than the other. The last mass of silvery white metal, which was the poisonous substance that His Majesty had mentioned, was almost the size of a grain of salt. Lucia carefully put it into a glass jar and put it aside. The other 2 masses of metal were much larger. One was about the size of an apricot, and the other was about the size of a fingernail. They were also silvery white in appearance, and could only be distinguished by her ability. These 2 were much easier to deal with. Lucia threw the large one into a basket, and gave it to Anna to cut into pieces for the new machine she was testing. The smaller one was put into a lead box and the container would be changed every 5 kilograms. If there was no other task, she could separate this number of metal blocks in 2 or 3 days. However, His Majesty had said that these bricks and stones were found in the ruins of the radioactive clan's buildings, and had been refined in advance. It would not be so convenient to change them into ores. After dissecting a black brick, Lucia stood up and opened her hands to Azima. This was also a rule set by His Majesty. Every time she finished dissecting, she had to make sure that there was nothing left on the scene or on the clothes. With Azima's ability to trace the origin, she could see the tiny particles that were difficult for ordinary people to see. Only after making sure that all the relevant materials had been collected could she proceed to the next raw material. About 2 hours later, Lucia felt that her magic power was reaching its limit. That's enough. Let's call it a day. Azima probably noticed her fatigue and came over to support her. We have to go to class in the evening. If you run out of magic power, you'll have to be carried back later. Lucia nodded. You're right. In addition to the problem of magic power, the airtight protective suit had made her sweat all over. If she could not concentrate, it would be a waste of effort to continue. After a simple cleaning, they returned to the room, took off their clothes, and heaved a sigh of relief. It was almost dusk. The breeze blowing in through the window was a little chilly. Listening to the swaying of the ivy, Lucia felt that she had come back to life in an instant. At this moment, a familiar voice suddenly came from behind. Thank you for your hard work. She turned to look at the door and saw His Majesty and Nightingale smiling as they walked into the inner yard. Nightingale was carrying 2 bottles of sky blue chaos drinks in her hands. This is... Azima was stunned. It's my personal reward. Don't tell anyone, Roland said, spreading his hands. Thank you. She took the drink from Nightingale somewhat stiffly. Lucia could not wait to open the bottle. When the refreshing drink flowed down her throat, she momentarily forgot about the great event. Perhaps it was indeed significant, but at this moment, she was satisfied enough. After they finished their drinks, Roland asked, "How's the decomposition going?" Chapter 1195. Roland randomly picked out a lead box, opened the lid, and held the silver-white metal block in his hand, feeling its heavy weight. Before it was stimulated, it was no different from a piece of pure iron. As long as one did not lick it, it was basically harmless. If one didn't have a deep enough understanding of it, it would be difficult to imagine just how much power was hidden in its small body just by looking at its appearance. It was with this that human beings first touched the threshold of mass energy conversion. Compared with all the chemical gunpowder before, this step could be said to be a new step. Roland roughly counted the number of lead boxes, and found that there were about 50 of them. Excluding the weight of the containers, each box contained 1 kilogram of uranium-235, which was nearly 100% pure. And there was more than one lead box like this in the room. If you put all of them together, perhaps the research institute would really be high energy. How do we use these things to turn them into the glory of the sun that you mentioned before? Nightingale asked curiously. Do we make them into special machines or ignite them? I always feel that they won't burn. You want to know? Roland could not help laughing. It's simpler than you think. Just pile the metal blocks in the box together, and they'll automatically emit light and heat. The uranium in this box alone is enough to raise Neverwinter to the ground. That's why Lucia has such a heavy responsibility. If she shakes her hand. Suddenly, the room fell into a dead silence. Lucia covered her mouth with her hand, and her eyes were filled with horror. No way. After a while, Azima said incredulously, "You mean if we're not careful, we may destroy the whole city?" Nightingale dashed forward, snatched the lead box from Roland's hand, and put it back into the box. Then she grabbed his hand and dragged him out. "Hey, wait, what are you going to do?" "Of course," Nightingale said anxiously. "Of course I'm going to take you out of the city, and then let someone carry these things away. Lucia, inform Wendy and ask her to contact the administrative office. I'll also go to Her Highness Tilly." Azima gritted her teeth. Only she can summon the sleeping spell. Stop, I was joking. The room was suddenly in chaos. Roland had to spend some time to calm everyone down. "Are you sure you're just joking?" Nightingale snapped. "Ahem, of course. I'm just talking about the theory," he quickly added. "But in reality, it's not that easy to activate it. Even if I do my best, I can't guarantee success." Lucia heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Your Majesty, you scared me to death." "This isn't funny." Nightingale glared at him. "If Vendy and Scroll heard this, whether it's a joke or not, I'm afraid they'll ask us to move the new research institute far away from Neverwinter," Roland said helplessly. "As long as you know, or we can move you to a safe place." "Well, forget what I said before." He cleared his throat. "As long as you don't say anything, Vendy and Scroll won't know. Maybe a bird has already heard it." Nightingale looked out of the window. "Intercept the message and I'll pay you a bottle of chaos drink," Roland said without hesitation. "Deal." She blinked and disappeared in front of the three people. Looking at Lucia and Azima, who were dumbfounded, Roland shrugged and said, Don't mind it. It was part of the joke." After a while, Nightingale returned to the room. No suspicious targets were found, but the reward, it's still valid. Lucia's expression finally softened. She hummed a tune and chewed on dried fish. "Well, Your Majesty," Azima said with a serious face after a moment of hesitation. "What you said before wasn't all a joke, was it? When you made the rules, you repeatedly emphasized the importance of weight. In order to avoid confusion or mismeasurement, you even controlled the weight of each lead box to be exactly 4 kilograms. When weighing, it must be together with the container. This way, you can ensure that the metal pieces in the box are equal." She paused. "Also, you said that if there was an accident in the research institute, or if there were signs of intruders, the first thing to do was to inform the guards to seal off the scene, and then immediately return to the castle to report, instead of entering the courtyard to check the situation. This proves that they are indeed dangerous, right?" Roland looked at her in surprise. "You have good observation skills. You're basically right. In addition to toxicity, weight is also a key factor. That's why they were placed separately. To be able to determine the nature of the extract from the rules and regulations, it could be said that she was cautious and meticulous. It was precisely this meticulousness that allowed her to awaken the ability to trace the source. But weight alone can only endanger the research institute. If I want to turn it into a weapon against the demons, I need something else." "Those particles that are placed separately?" Azima quickly realized what was going on. Not exactly, but at least half of it. The composition of natural uranium was very complicated. In addition to uranium compounds, it was usually accompanied by many radioactive substances. Most of them were secondary products of decay. Some of them had completely lost their radioactivity and became stable, while others were still in the process of decay. Although the radioactive people had refined the ore when they built the Temple of the Cursed, the basic composition was still the same, which could be seen from Lucia's results. Uranium-238, which could not be used as a weapon, could be recognized by the magic ceremony cube, and was almost as effective as uranium-235. Therefore, all of it was sent to the backyard of the North Slope Mountain. Uranium 235, which could be regarded as a weapon if its purity was above 90%, was very low in nature, accounting for only 1% of natural uranium. Therefore, the first obstacle for those who wanted to use the brilliant radiation route was refining it, which was also a hurdle that most people could not overcome. However, it was not the rarest element. Its subsequent decay products such as thorium, radium, radon, and polonium were all extremely rare. What Roland needed was the naturally occurring polonium-210, which was the most common isotope in the plutonium family. As the flower of his motherland, Roland was very familiar with radium and polonium. Madame Curie, who had repeatedly mentioned them in textbooks, was famous for discovering them. Although the half-life of polonium-210 was only more than 100 days, and its content was appallingly low, Madame Curie's many attempts to extract it had failed. She still pointed out its existence from the strong radioactivity shown by the ore solution. Both radium and polonium could be used to make neutron sources, which was related to the second obstacle of the brilliant radiation: detonation. The principle of the first generation of nuclear weapons was very simple. It could be summed up in one sentence: the fission of nuclides releases energy. In the case of uranium, after uranium-235 received a neutron, it would be excited into unstable uranium-236, and then split into two lighter nuclides and more free neutrons. The mass difference between the two would be converted into energy. Obviously, the released neutrons would hit other nuclides, and the cycle would continue, forming a chain reaction. At the same time, a huge burst of energy would be no different from an explosion. However, in the microscopic world, the gap between atomic nuclei was as wide as heaven and earth. As was written in textbooks, if the atom was seen as a football field, then the nucleus was just an ant on it. If one was unlucky, the neutron would soon fly out of the field, and the reaction would stop. To ensure that every ant would be hit, it was necessary to pile up enough football fields around it to ensure that no matter which direction the neutron flew in, there would be an ant in its path. Reflected in the macroscopic world, it was obvious that mass and shape. In fact, the critical mass was not a fixed value. For example, the probability of being hit by a football field arranged in a straight line was obviously lower than that of a stacked football field. The specific result required a lot of calculations based on the shape of the critical mass. Roland had even heard an anecdote that someone had lost a war because of a wrong calculation. Of course, as a latecomer who stood on the shoulders of giants, he naturally did not have to start from scratch. Countless experiments had proved that the critical mass was the smallest when the object was spherical, and uranium-235 was 52 kilograms. He was already cautious enough to limit the amount of uranium in each lead box to 1 kilogram. However, the so-called critical mass was not fixed. If the area of the football field could be greatly reduced, or if enough extra neutrons were provided for the nuclides, the critical mass would be greatly reduced. The former was the principle of the internal explosion bomb. The detonator was placed outside the bomb, and when it exploded, the reactants would be squeezed together, causing the density to increase sharply and surpass the critical mass. With the current technology in Neverwinter, it was too difficult to calculate the critical mass of an irregular unit, or to accurately control the detonation of an explosive. Therefore, Roland set his sights on the latter. Chapter 1196. The neutron source could be understood as a fission catalyst. With the extra neutrons provided by the neutron source, even uranium-235, which was below the critical mass, could be efficiently split. In theory, polonium and radium separated from uranium, or could be combined with beryllium to form a neutron source. There were no technical difficulties involved. Beryllium could release a large number of neutrons when it was bombarded by alpha particles. As long as they were put together, the neutron source would work. All three were naturally occurring substances. Compared with man-made elements that were extremely difficult to process or required complex production processes, the neutron source was undoubtedly more feasible. Roland chose beryllium over radium purely for safety reasons. Although the half-life of polonium-210 was short, It mostly decayed by alpha photons and produced very little gamma photons. In other words, as long as it was not eaten, it was almost as safe as uranium. However, radium was different. Whether it produced radon gas after it decayed or gamma photons emitted by itself, it was a safety hazard that could not be ignored. In order to avoid accidents during the experiment, beryllium neutron source was the most suitable choice. In addition, beryllium also reflected neutrons. If it was used as a shell, it could further increase the efficiency of neutron utilization. If both beryllium and beryllium were used at the same time, together with enough uranium-235, even the simplest and most reliable gun structure could achieve a good result. Beryllium was widely found in emeralds. Such a distinctive mineral saved Ozima the trouble of traveling far and wide to find it. All she needed to do was to spread the news through merchants and widely purchase it in the Four Kingdoms. Roland was very clear about the level of technology in Neverwinter. The principle of resplendent radiation was simple, but every 10% increase in efficiency was a threshold. From 1% to 90%, it required a large number of theoretical calculations and experimental corrections. If the energy release efficiency could not be reached, it would be impossible to miniaturize the weapon, and the weapon-grade uranium that they had painstakingly accumulated would be wasted. Without Lucia, the cost of refining would be an insurmountable peak. But at the same time, if you could afford it or didn't care about the losses, rubbing a nuclear bomb in your hands was no joke. The technical thresholds varied greatly, but the principle was the same. Thanks to the natural advantage of mass energy conversion over chemical gunpowder, even if only 1% of uranium was involved in the fission, it would be powerful enough to reverse the situation. In this battle of life and death that would determine the fate of the race, he would do his best. Moreover, stealing the divine fire in such a barbaric era and shortening the distance between humans and the sun itself was a kind of romance, wasn't it? As long as there was a chance, he was willing to give it a try. Good, keep it like this. Roland patted Lucia's head and said, when all the lead cabinets are filled, we can start the official experiment. Yes, Your Majesty, Lucia said energetically. At the same time, in the Air Knight Academy in Neverwinter, this area, which was located to the west of the new research institute, was quiet. Today was a day off for the students. Most of them had left early to enjoy the time with their families. Good was an exception. Take the upper hand, press the pole. Crosswind roll. He sat on the simulated cockpit and set the wind direction for himself while responding according to the rules in the flight manual. The wooden rod squeaked like an old water wheel that was in disrepair. The temperature in the training room was quite stuffy. After practicing for a long time, his back was soaked with sweat. Beads of sweat dripped from his chin from time to time and scattered on the simple instrument panel. Good did not stop until the handle slipped. He leaned against the chair and heaved a sigh of relief. After nearly half a year of learning, he was no longer the ignorant layman. Although he could not say that he could recite the flight manual written by Her Highness fluently, he could say that all the basic operations were imprinted in his mind. In the beginning, he was in a flurry when he boarded the cockpit. Now he could operate according to the password, even with his eyes closed. If he gave the command to himself, he would not even need to say it out loud. As long as he thought of the command, his body would respond immediately. But could this really make him fly? No matter how hard he tried, he could not picture the scene of flying against the wind in his mind. Capture the direction and strength of the wind, feel the posture and vibration of the body, and then exert the corresponding operating force. These were the original words in the manual, but he did not know what kind of feeling it was. Whether he gently pulled the handle halfway or completely, the cockpit would not give him any feedback. As for the instrument panel drawn with ink lines, it was more like a mockery of his efforts. The more proficient he became, the more frustrated Good felt. Just when he was a little upset, the door of the training room was suddenly pushed open with a squeak. You're really here? What do you think? Am I right? Good turned around and looked at the two people who walked into the room in surprise. They were Finkin and Heinz, who were in the same team. Why are you? Don't you want to have fun during your vacation? Finkin whistled. Because the fun is in the academy. As for you, it's fine if you don't have a family, But don't you have a cute sister? Heinz stepped forward and put his arm around Good's neck. She asked me to tell you not to tire yourself out. TSK TSK. How nice. Good's expression suddenly tensed up. Wait, you two went to my place? Of course. Where else could we find you? Finkin raised his eyebrows. Her name is Rachel, right? How about introducing her to us? Don't even think about it. Good glared back at Finkin. Are you saying that we're not good enough? Finkin protested. At least I have a formal house in the Redwater River community. Good was silent for a moment and finally shook his head helplessly. It's none of your business. It's my sister's. Rachel's problem. You don't want to be with her. Why? I think she's a good girl, Heinz said confusedly. Tell me about it. Finkin was also curious. Don't ask this, Good said grumpily. Tell me something else. What do you mean by having fun? Finkin did not continue the topic. He lowered his voice and said mysteriously, Do you want to try a real plane? Good was stunned. What did you say? I saw it when I was climbing the wall a few days ago, Finkin said with a proud smile. There are several new airplanes in the hangar. Although they're covered with cloth, they're similar in size to the unicorn that Her Highness is piloting. In other words, those planes were prepared for us. A few days ago? Why didn't you tell me then? I was afraid that you'd be too excited and leak the news, Finkin said with a shrug. Today is a holiday and there are only a few people in the academy. It's a good opportunity to sneak in and see what it looks like. Are you crazy? Good said in disbelief. Without permission, we can't enter the airport. Those soldiers won't let you in either, Finkin said as he rolled his eyes at him. Of course we'll take another way, and we won't go through the airport. But we're just going to have a look, Heinz said. You should feel it. Her Highness Tilly has been smiling less recently, and her training has become stricter. At this rate, we may have to wait for a month or two before we can touch it. Compared to this simple wooden platform, don't you want to see what the plane we're going to fly looks like in advance? If you don't want to go, we'll go first, Finkin said with a frown. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.